The sword fell to the ground with a clang. The wounded man said, breathing heavily, "Not bad. I never thought that someone could defeat the descendant of dragons." Carl's, the Knight of Light. Carl's, his armor spattered with blood, towered over him, swinging his sword. The man in black, covered in wounds, continued, "But you're too late. Even if you kill me, the demons from the continent will arrive here soon, and the whole earth will be washed with blood," he finished, looking angrily at the knight and stretching his hand forward. Laughing, the angry emperor continued, "Everything will still be as I, Exceltrion, planned." But before he could finish, Carls struck him with his sword. The Knight of Light looked at the fallen enemy and said, "It doesn't matter. No matter what you do to destroy this world, I will still save it." The emperor, covered in blood, lay dead at his feet. Finally, after defeating the mad Emperor Exceltrion, Carlos fights back against the hordes of demons threatening to destroy the world. Soon the hope of victory began to fade, for the demons were strong. They had huge claws and wings, and they mercilessly attacked people. But under the leadership of Carls the Knight of Light, humanity prepared for a long and difficult war against the demons. This is the name of this story, The Great War of Humans Against Demons. A dark-haired man in a suit read from his phone. His eyes sparkled, his cheeks glowed, and his mouth was slightly open with interest. I've reread it several times already, but the prologue always grabs my attention, especially the scene where Carls killed the Emperor, the man said enthusiastically to himself as he scrolled through the story on his phone. The Great War of Humans and Demons is a unique work in which the main character Carls appears very rarely, but his arrival is always the most long-awaited, and the writer's attention is focused more on building the world than on the great deeds of the hero. The black-haired man quickly typed into his phone, "Dear author, please tell me when the sequel is coming out. I've already read the last chapter." As he watched his message load, he thought about how much he loved novels set in that setting. The man put the phone on the table and moved back in his chair, raising his head to the ceiling. He begged the author to write the next chapter as soon as possible. After all, he sent him a donation of $10. The reader looked at the sponsor ratings on his phone and wondered if the author wasn't writing because there weren't enough donations. Moving closer to the table with the computer, the man picked up the mouse. He decided to finish the work quickly in order to return home. But he was distracted again, looking at his phone with a surprised exclamation and opening his eyes wide. It was really unexpected to receive a message from the author, he thought, looking at the notification with impatience. Grabbing the phone with both hands, the man wondered if it was really so nice to receive my message and donation. Suddenly, joy overwhelmed the young man. Maybe the author would even share with him information about the release of the next chapter. He seemed to shine, thinking about it. Finally, the black-haired man decided to open the message. It said that it was dedicated to Bang Kwang-suk, who loved the novel, The Great War of Humans Against Demons, the most. The man looked at his phone in horror, trying to understand how he knew his name. Then something clicked and everything around was covered in darkness. Ban turned around trying to understand what happened. Suddenly the lights went out. His phone lit up brightly and a voice came from somewhere. "My strength is leaving me, and therefore I will be brief. The story ends." He said that he could no longer stay in this world. His magic was running out, and he had to write with the last of it. Panicked thoughts flashed through the man's head about who was speaking and what was wrong with his phone. He tried to point at the screen, but it only glowed brightly. The world around him seemed to split in two, and the phone glowed with a purple light brighter and brighter. Ban had no idea what was happening, and the voice did not stop. "That's why I came up with another way. You know the world of the Great War of Humans Against Demons better than anyone, so I decided to leave the fate of this world in your hands." The voice was talking about using the last of its magical powers to cast the spell Mystical Reincarnation, when a wind rose around, and the papers lying on the table flew in all directions. The last sentence in this dialogue is a spell that will reincarnate you. Please do everything in your power to save this world. Ban's hair was completely disheveled. He didn't understand why he had to save this world. The voice said that he didn't know who exactly he would be reborn as, but if he saved the world, he would be able to return back. A round seal with strange signs appeared under the man's feet. He tried to shout to the stranger, but it was all useless. Ban randomly pressed the glowing screen of the smartphone, but it did not respond, and the voice uttered the last words, "May the God of Light bless you." The reader kept trying to find out from the author of the story what he was trying to do with him. The man's face distorted with panic. He decided that maybe if he donated even more, everything would stop. But everything around him went dark. Ban came to his senses in the huge hall from the crowd's shouts. "Long live the Emperor of the Great Rune!" His face was covered in sweat. He couldn't believe what had happened. The people all praised Emperor Exceltrion, but he looked at them in horror. The soldiers around him spoke of how his majesty had brought them peace, and Ban realized that he had truly been reborn in the body of Emperor Exceltrion in the great war of humans against demons. The Rune Empire is the strongest on the continents of Iroth and Exceltrion. Its emperor looked like a handsome man with golden hair and blue eyes, but also the main villain in the novel, the antagonist Khalsa, covered in the blood of his victims. People with dragon blood are rarely born on the continent. They are called descendants of the dragon. And that was exactly what Exceltrion was, fury burning in his eyes as he fought. Unfortunately, he suffered from madness, which was not at all rare for the descendants of the dragon. Excel tried to deal with this by often being at the bottom of the bottle. But this did not help to drown out the voices in his head that demanded blood. In the end, his madness prevailed, and he led the whole world to destruction. Fear gripped him as he sat on the throne. Ban was in this body, and his subjects continued to shout gratitude to him. When the man was finally about to leave, an important official approached him and, bowing, reported that the infantry would now be seen off to war on the demonic continent, followed by the Knights of the Black Dragon and a supply caravan. The man tried to understand what was happening and asked him if they were really going to the demonic continent. Looking at the emperor with burning eyes, the minister confirmed that the army should have already reached the Wall of Tears, and the clash with the demons would soon begin. Ban stood with his back turned. He remembered this episode word for word. The mad emperor sent his army to the demonic continent. Memories flashed through his head. This happened in the 12th chapter of the novel. The mad emperor invades the continent, and for this the demons will soon mount a counterattack on the empire. Horror gripped the man. He realized that he was somewhere at the beginning of the Great War of Humans against demons. Then a thought suddenly came into Ban's head. He thought that the author asked him to do everything to save the world, and that in order to return to his world, he needed to save this one. Turning to the soldiers, the newly minted emperor realized that the destruction of the human world began precisely with this fateful military campaign, which would provoke the invasion of demons and confrontation with Carls. Determination lit up his eyes. Ban had to stop this campaign of conquest in order to survive. There is also another good reason to stop the campaign. This official, Enpika. This serious man was a real demon with an evil grin. Send a messenger immediately with my order to turn the troops around and call off the campaign, the emperor exclaimed, grabbing his sword for assurance, and Pinka tried to ask him again to understand what was going on. Do you have something to say? Do you have any reason to believe that I should not stop the campaign? The man looked with a grin at the minister, who was trying to persuade the emperor to continue the campaign, since he had prepared for it so carefully and for so long. But Excel claimed that it was the minister who proposed and prepared the campaign, and also slipped him a document to print when he was in a drunken stupor. And Pinka looked at his majesty in shock. Repeating his order to stop the campaign, the emperor said that he would send the official to his own people, and his blade flashed in the sun. The minister looked at the sword in horror and claimed that the demons were not his people. You said that. I didn't say anything about demons, the man said, and swung his sword, fatally wounding the minister. The soldiers watched this massacre with fear, and Pinka fell to his knees, blood flowing from his wound and covering everything around him. Exceltrion looked at his body with a mad and merciless gaze, his sword covered in blood. Inside, Ban couldn't believe what had happened. The thought that he had killed a man horrified him. Streams of blood flowed down the stairs. The man tried to understand how this happened. He just wanted to scare the general. Breathing heavily from what he had experienced, the emperor looked at his sword, trying to find an explanation for why his body was not acting the way he wanted. The only thought that came to his mind was that he was thinking, but it was Exceltrion who took action. It was as if there was more than just Ban's consciousness in this body. Does this mean that Excel's consciousness is still here? While he was thinking, dark smoke rose from the spilled blood. A monster with gray skin, huge wings, claws and horns appeared in place of the dead official. It roared and asked the emperor how he knew about him. Ban thought to himself that he was omniscient because he had read the novel. He even wanted to show the phone with the text, but out loud he said, I am omniscient because I am the emperor, and raised his blade. The demon gnashed his huge fangs in anger. He growled loudly and threatened, stretching out his paw with sharp claws and attacking Excel. The soldiers suddenly rushed to the defense, standing between him and the demon. One of them cut the enemy, and there was even more blood around. The soldier turned around trying to figure out if his majesty was hurt and was going to protect him. The other knight was trying to figure out how the prime minister became a demon. The emperor angrily called his defenders to silence and, pushing them aside, stepped forward. His blue eyes were blazing with anger. And inside Ban was shocked. He just wanted to ask them to move away, and this emperor was saying that he would execute them. The soldiers fell silent. This man really scared them. Excel squinted as he looked at the defeated demon. The wounded monster felt its strength draining away. The emperor mercilessly ordered to interrogate him and find out who his accomplices were, and if he did not talk, to kill him. The knights obeyed him unquestioningly. I am confiscating the prime minister's property for the benefit of the crown, and you go there and search his house. To finish the job, you must execute his entire family, including his parents and children. The man continued to give instructions. The soldier agreed with doubt, not daring to contradict the emperor. Ban pursed his lips. He couldn't control his speech and spoke as Exceltrian would. His will was strong, but controlling the emperor took a lot of effort. Trying to downplay his cruelty, Ban said that the real prime minister was most likely already dead, and the knights immediately confirmed that there had been no contact between him and his family recently. Then he decided to postpone their execution and keep an eye on them. The subjects were really glad that they didn't have to kill the innocent. Finally left alone, Ban gave in to his feelings and grabbed his head, completely exhausted. Sitting down on the huge imperial bed, he thought that if he couldn't restrain Exceltrian, the history of the great war of humans against demons would repeat itself. The country will become a real villain and turn into the bloody empire of Rune, and he will lead all this, the main antagonist. Ban knew this would indeed be a worst-case scenario. Now, realizing how many problems there were around him, the man screamed in panic that he would like to be reborn as someone other than the Mad Emperor. For example, the Knight of Light Carls, the main character. But it was beyond his power to change anything now. Ban tried to calm down and think that, fortunately, he did not yet feel the mental illness of the dragon's descendants that the emperor would suffer from. As he thought, he fingered his fingers and recalled the whole day. Exceltrian, the demon Enpic. He really got into a novel. Maybe the author who sent him here was actually a mage from this continent. Ban imagined him wearing a pointed hat, holding a staff, surrounded by the strongest magic. He kept wondering why the voice asked him to save this world, because he doesn't even know the plot of the novel to the end. The emperor's face suddenly changed, as if he was a different person. With an evil smile, he said that the book about reincarnation and travel between worlds was in the old imperial library. Ban winced, regaining control, worry evident on his face. He realized he hadn't read it, but the man's gaze became stern again. He continued to talk about the fact that he had read this book, and whether the author had descendants. This didn't last long. Ban became himself again and lowered his head. This scared him a lot. It was truly scary to share my consciousness with a mad emperor. The only thing that calmed him down was that his consciousness was still stronger. Grabbing his hair as he tried to come up with a plan to get out of here, he was glad that he had at least stopped the key event, the march to the demon continent. Closing his eyes, Ban realized that he was completely confused by so much information. But one goal was clear: to save this world. A fair-haired man sat in the vast imperial chambers. He was increasingly upset by the memories of the novel. He did not remember the ending, and was in the body of the doomed antagonist. Suddenly, someone disturbed the emperor, saying that Sir Blumhartz was asking for an audience. He perked up, remembering the hero who was from the Order of the White Dragon. In the novel, the Knights of the White Dragon are the emperor's personal guard, and Blumhartz is its leader. Even when everyone turned their backs on the emperor, Blumhartz remained loyal to him until his last breath and died fighting demons. The man was angry again. For him, this man was a stupid old man who only knew slogans about justice and honor. Axel's face was distorted by an evil grin. He would bury this man if he started bothering him, just because he once taught him fencing. When Blumhartz walked in, Ban saw a stern old man with medals on his chest, gray hair down to his shoulders, a beard, and all covered in scars. The knight greeted him, dropping to one knee. "An interesting way to attempt on my life. You want to get rid of me because I'm going crazy," said the emperor. The old man began to apologize, claiming that he was truly angry about the assassination attempt on the prime minister. But Excel reminded him that he himself killed him, although the Knights of the Black and White Dragons should have done this. Bowing his head, Blumhartz knew that as the commander of the White Dragons, he had no excuse. Ban knew it wasn't his fault, and he looked at the knight with sadness, thinking that he was busy guarding the northern border all year round, where he served impeccably and should be rewarded. The man really wanted to thank the knight. Then the emperor, gritting his teeth, nevertheless acknowledged Blumhardt's merits, despite his advanced age. The old man was grateful to his majesty for the praise, and rising from his knees, he admitted that the emperor had changed greatly. "I haven't changed. I just decided this time that I won't let the voices in my head do anything," answered Excel. The knight didn't understand what kind of voices were bothering the emperor. Then His Majesty confessed that he was descended from a dragon race, which shocked the old commander incredibly. He remembered how the emperor, with madness in his eyes, said that he would personally execute those who mentioned the dragon race. Standing over a mountain of dead bodies, Excel threatened that anyone who did not listen to him would become like them. The soldiers could only obey. Blumhardt remembered the horror with which he watched this scene. The mad emperor, covered in blood, angrily shouted at his subjects. Ban grimaced, the memory making him sick. The knight admitted that he had been searching for a cure for this problem for the past 3 years. And lowering his head, he repented that he did not dare to report this, since His Majesty had forbidden raising this topic. But if they give him a little more time, the captain continued. But then an idea came to the emperor's mind. All the scientists of the empire worked on a cure for the emperor's hereditary madness. But, unfortunately, it was all in vain. Ban smiled. But they didn't know about the future of this world. It's still possible. The commander had absolutely no idea what the man was talking about and just looked at him in shock. Exceltrion is the strongest of the dragon descendants of his time. He even fought against Carls without armor and weapons, thought Ban, clenching his hand into a fist. He wanted to laugh. He clearly remembered how it was highlighted in the plot. The emperor was filled with joy. Now he knew how to suppress the dragon's heredity and change the course of the romance. Blumhardt tried to understand how His Highness knew this, but Ban could only answer that the knight had come at a good hour, and then he immediately asked to call Senator Duran, for whom there were urgent orders. The old man bowed and went to carry out the order. While shaking his hand, the emperor thought about the fact that it was now the year 427 according to the dragon calendar, and according to the plot, Excel's death would happen in 433. A novel flashed before his mind, a chapter of which was called The Great War of Humans Against Demons, year 433, according to the imperial dragon calendar. He still had about 7 years left in him, Ban thought, as he took off his jacket. During this time, he was obliged to gain control over Excel's consciousness and suppress the dragon's heredity in him. It is also important to avoid conflict with Carls. In the future, he will expose Excel's plans and turn against him, taking the side of humanity. During their fight, the emperor asked, "I am doing justice by exterminating demons. How do you justify your rebellion against me?" To this, the Knight of Light replied, "You have brought the people to the brink of destruction and you still dare to call it justice." Carls claimed that he had gone mad because he was the descendant of a dragon, which angered the emperor greatly. His pride was hurt and he rushed into battle shouting threats. And so the end catastrophic event occurred, which destroyed everything. Banu wanted to cry from these memories. Walking around the room, the man thought that he didn't know when and how madness would take over when meeting Carls. And the right option would be to avoid meetings altogether until a way to suppress the dragon heredity appeared. It is unknown how the plot will change from his rebirth. Taking the blade in his hands, Ban was worried that he would have to kill demons to prevent the destruction of the world. The emperor's gaze became firm again. Everything was simple. We just need to find some way to deal with the demons, Ban thought. While Excel decided that he would immediately cut them all down and clench the tip of the sword in his fist. Blood was running down his hand. Ban froze in shock. The mad emperor must be crazy to be clutching the blade of a dagger in his palm, he decided, holding his injured hand. At this time, Old Man Blumhardt walked quickly along the corridor, thinking that His Majesty was with them again. His stern face sparkled with happiness. He was glad that Excel was again as clear-minded as before. Closing his eyes, he thanked the God of Light for hearing his prayers and giving the Empire hope. In such an elevated mood, the knight walked about the Emperor's business, when Sir Duran stood in the way, greeting the master of the northern borders. "How fortunate that we met. I was just looking for you. His Majesty wants to see you," Blumhardt exclaimed. Sir Duran was truly surprised by this. He was just on his way to the Emperor, because he heard about the reprisal against the Prime Minister and thought that His Majesty had become his former self. The stern knight looked with joy at the minister, who was hoping for a productive conversation. On the way they continued to talk. Duran did not believe that he would finally be able to tell the Emperor about state affairs. But Blumhardt did not let him get too inspired and advised him to be patient. When the two finally stood before the Emperor, Senator Duran immediately dropped to one knee in greeting. Excel ordered the man to stand up and asked if he was aware of today's events. "Of course, I couldn't even imagine that the Prime Minister could be a demon. After all, you personally appointed him to this position." Sir Duran, the head of the Senate and one of the most powerful magicians in the Empire, happily answered. The Emperor looked at him angrily. "I see you still love to twist words." But this didn't upset Duran at all. He just laughed and asked how he could be of help. Having looked closely at the magician, Excel said that he needed to visit one place alone, and while he was gone, he would replace him and hide his absence. Blumhart's frightened voice came from behind him, begging His Highness not to travel incognito, not understanding why anything should change when everything in the Empire was finally stable. The Emperor explained that the purpose of his journey was to suppress the dragon's heredity. "Have you really found a way?" Sir Duran was very surprised when the Emperor agreed. While Excelsior and the Knight were arguing about who would go on the campaign, the magician began to think seriously. Finally, he replied that he was capable of replacing the Emperor for no more than a month. Blumhart turned around, expecting the Senate leader to be on his side, but Duran said there would be a lot of rumors if anyone suspected. "That's more than enough," Ban agreed with a grin. The agitated knight tried to persuade the Emperor to take some guards. Looking at the old man with a crazy look, Excel refused. "Very few people were a threat to me on this continent," he argued. Becoming even angrier, Ban really thought he was the mad emperor. Falling to his knees, Blumhart did not retreat. His only request was to take at least one guard, he begged, banging his head on the floor. The Emperor was speechless. He only looked at the knight with irritation. This scene touched Bana incredibly. He didn't remember that in the novel Sir Blumhart was such a warm-hearted person. It was impossible to refuse him. When Excel finally got ready, he was met at the gate by the gatekeeper. The Emperor seemed to be impatient to see him out, and he scared the guy to the point of trembling. Ban tried to apologize to himself. Duran came out to meet him with a bundle of clothes, saying that His Majesty had better change his clothes if he wanted to remain unrecognized. The bundle contained shining armor, which surprised Excel, but the magician explained that these were the late Emperor's belongings for traveling incognito, in which he was mistaken for an ordinary mercenary. The Emperor began to take off his clothes. When it came to his pants, he froze. The thought flashed through his mind that it was strange to change clothes in front of everyone. But turning around, Ban realized that no one would think of looking at the Emperor's body. Everyone around turned away and closed their eyes. The doubts and shame of a modern man fought in him with the spontaneity of a fantasy emperor. The Emperor won and asked Duran to help him get dressed. Suddenly, His Majesty remembered the guard that Sir Blumhart had imposed on him. But the minister was informed that the guard would come to the gate. Footsteps and the clink of armor were heard nearby. Duran wanted to say something else about the guard, but a smiling girl in full armor with a sword and shield, her chestnut hair pulled back into a ponytail, approached them. She apologized and said that she was looking for His Highness. Excel turned around and glared at the female knight. She turned red and shuddered, looking at the man in shock. "This is Sir Blumhart's daughter," Senator Durant finally finished. And the girl was horrified when she realized that the man in front of her was completely naked. Her hair stood on end, and her shield fell from her hands. Her scream echoed through the castle. In panic, she covered her face with her hands, trying to understand why the Emperor was naked. Ban also had horror flashing through his mind. He turned around to look at old Duran, who had a smile on his lips. The man was indignant. Why did the magician just now say that Blumhart sent his daughter? At this time, already dressed, Excel was finally able to answer the girl that he was changing clothes. The whole Red Knight apologized for seeing His Majesty without clothes. The Emperor was more interested in the skills of Blumhart's daughter. Finally pulling herself together, the girl looked at the Emperor with confidence and assured him that her strength was equal to the lowest-ranking knight of the White Dragon. Her fortitude amazed Ban, but the Emperor looked at her with a grin. He was not surprised at all. She was the daughter of the leader of the knights. The man wondered what the lesser knight of the White Dragon was capable of. "Words alone are not enough for me," Excel said menacingly, drawing his blade, which made the girl opposite her grip the shield tighter. The Emperor shouted that he must test her skills and attacked with magic. These words did not seem to frighten the lady at all. She only drew her sword, preparing for a fight, while Ban tried to stop the crazy owner of the body, thinking that he could have just said a compliment. The fire sword strike was aimed straight at the girl, but she managed to take his magic on her shield. Her sword also burst into flames and, concentrating, she rushed into a counterattack. Their blades crossed, the Emperor's huge sword and the girl's small rapier. Excel did not expect this at all. Finally exhaling, Ban was glad that she was able to answer. Smiling menacingly, the Emperor said, "Okay, I see you have mastered the basic techniques." The knight could only thank him, looking at Excel fearlessly. After asking her name, the man continued to press on the girl's thin sword. And from such efforts, her hands began to tremble, and she introduced herself, Renard Blumhart. Putting away his sword, the Emperor repeated the name. He promised that when they returned from their journey, he would knight her as the White Dragon. While Buck thought that it would be great to become friends, just like in the popular anime. Renard dropped to one knee in gratitude, sheathing her blade. A worried Duran, looking at this, asked not to torment Blumhart's daughter. The Emperor replied that everything was not so bad and took the last piece of armor from the senator's hands. The magician was still in a cheerful mood. He was ready to replace Excel during his absence. But all this glory was not needed by His Majesty. This did not affect the good-natured senator at all. He only apologized for saying too much. The gatekeeper asked where they were heading, and the man replied, "Somewhere closer to the bloody forest." The seals in the gates lit up with a golden light. The gatekeeper said that he would move them to the Klee Gorge, to a small hut. Bowing, he warned the Emperor to be careful, because the bloody forest was the territory of another state. Duran handed His Majesty a bag and said that it contained money for the journey. Ban did not refuse. The Emperor immediately headed towards the brightly shining gate, urging Renard on. The girl shuddered. She was not going to leave the man alone, and she ran after him, shouting for him to wait. They came out into the forest. It was night all around. Only the reflections of magic dispersed the darkness. Excel threw the bag of money to the night girl, who was curious as to where it ended up. This surprised the Emperor. He did not think that Renard did not know about the bloody forest, but she said that she had only heard that it was in the possession of the elves. This is a territory contested between elves and barbarians, Ban clarified, looking around. Also in this forest are emerald ruins, in which the elixir of the ancients is hidden, Ban recalled. That's where they would be heading, the Emperor said, which surprised the girl, who didn't think they would be looking for ruins. But the man confirmed that it was there that the artifact was located that could suppress the dragon's heredity. Renard tried to explain that the ruins were usually teeming with monsters and traps, and that they couldn't handle it alone. Turning away, the Emperor walked forward. He did not have time to explain everything to the girl. He was going to catch the elf and find out the location of the ruins. Renard has the characteristics of blood energy key, Ban suddenly remembered. Excel didn't like that the girl talked too much, and he ordered her to find an elf, since their family had strong blood ki. From the novel, the reader remembered that multicolored key cells are responsible for different abilities, and orange ones gave good searching abilities. The orange QE cells were the ones that dominated Renard's strength. This color of magic surrounded her and burned in her eyes. However, the girl looked very guilty and admitted that she had never tracked elves, and the distance was great. This answer angered the Emperor. He was going to burn down the entire forest to find at least one elf. A shudder ran through the girl's body. She wondered why her father had sent her with this terrible man. But then the magic suddenly activated, and she stopped His Majesty and screamed that a living creature was rapidly approaching them. A cry for help was heard, and Renard and the Emperor looked back. A little elf ran towards them with tears in his eyes, chased by a crowd of huge green orcs. Their eyes glowed in the dark, and drool dripped from their huge fangs. Ekel was not at all scared, unlike the girl, who recognized the orc barbarians. This scene really shocked Renard. She didn't think that orcs hated elves so much that they even killed children. Magic flowed around the Emperor. He was glad that the elf himself came to them and stepped forward. Clutching his chest, he was completely engulfed in magical light. He had no more strength to restrain himself. His face twisted in anger. The dragon blood was getting out of control. In fear, Renard extended her hand, trying to stop the man. But rushing forward with a mad laugh, he did not hear her at all, and saw only the prey in front of him. The small, fair-haired elf boy didn't understand anything at all, and the girl asked Excel not to touch him at least. The Emperor, looking like a wild beast shrouded in bloody magic, shut her up. In just a second, he flashed through the crowd of orcs and beheaded them all. The bloody road stretched out behind him, and Excel rushed forward, his eyes flashing. All these bodies and blood made him laugh, enveloped in red magic. The remaining orcs surrounded the man, but his magic only grew stronger. He threatened to leave no trace of them. Axes flashed through the air. Covered in blood, the man didn't even seem to notice them. However, the magic did not allow the weapons to even come close, and they bounced back with a ringing sound. This made Excel laugh, and he rushed forward and growled, "Did you really think you could touch me with such a primitive weapon?" With bloody palms, he grabbed two orcs by the heads. With a mad face, the Emperor slammed their foreheads together with all his might, causing blood to spurt out in all directions. With his eyes burning, the man shouted a cry of victory. Ban was also screaming in his soul, but this time from horror. Clutching his head, his only thought was why Excel was such a psycho. Remembering the novel, Ban thought about a beautiful day in the Imperial Castle. There on the parade ground, a little boy was diligently learning the science of swordsmanship. Young Blumharts praised the Emperor that he would soon surpass the White Dragon Knights, and the joyful boy could not believe it. The knight laughed, confirming his words, and the Emperor was beaming. He loved to study with Blumhardt and he liked fencing so much. In reality, XL completely lost his temper, fighting with all his enemies. Standing on a mountain of orc corpses, he swung their heads and laughed. Ban thought it was completely senseless cruelty. As a child, Blumhardt trained Axel in horizontal techniques and how to fight an opponent who is much larger. So one day the commander-in-chief knighted the young man Axel. All this flashed before Ban's eyes and upset him even more, because now the emperor did not even remember all these lessons, but chopped up enemies like a butcher. It wasn't just blood that was running down the man's chin, it was fresh blood from a brutal murder. Still smiling, Axel wiped it away, and Ban realized that he was just a maniac. Tears ran down the elf boy's scratched face and he screamed with all his might. He cowered on the ground, trembling, looking at the mad emperor and calling him a monster. The man froze, remembering the child. But the anger did not leave him. He thought that this was another enemy, and magic sparked in his hand. He tried to grab the elf. Suddenly, Renard stood in his way, covering the boy with her body, urging the emperor to pull himself together. The man's magic gradually subsided, and he spoke her name more calmly. The girl's gaze showed determination to protect the child to the end. A calmed-down Axel looked at her coldly and said, "Don't you understand? I don't want to be recognized. Why did you call me your majesty?" The knight blushed and pressed her hands to her lips, apologizing. Bowing, she continued to apologize, while the man said that it was unknown whether they would need this cub. He didn't know anything. He probably wouldn't even find his way home. Huddled into a ball, the little elf only repeated that he was afraid. Suddenly someone screamed, "Rondo!" Hearing this, the child froze and his tear-stained eyes opened wide. Voices were heard in the night forest. It seemed to them that the baby was nearby. The boy's big tear-stained eyes sparkled. Renard immediately realized that most likely these were his relatives, and Axel said, "He's useful, it turns out." The elven search party looked around. They were already close. The emperor raised his hand to be seen and called them. The elf looked back and froze in shock. A strange company appeared before him, in the form of a man, a woman, and an elf, and the entire space around them was covered in blood. The rescue team screamed, and then Axel realized that he was also covered in blood. Panic gripped the elves. They thought that Rondo needed to be saved. And finally, the tired elf boy fell fast asleep in the arms of his fellow elf. A group of elves, Renard and the emperor, sat in a spacious wooden hut. The elves asked for forgiveness for not immediately realizing that the people were sleeping Rondo. The main elf was really surprised that they killed the orcs with their bare hands, but Axel just asked for something to wash his face with, which really shocked the commander. Angrily, he repeated his request. Then the young elf finally heard him and brought a towel. With careful movements, he wiped the blood off himself, and the entire towel immediately turned blood red. Recognition flashed in the elf's eyes when he saw the emperor's pure face. The emperor only looked attentively at the commander, who called him Magnus. This name shocked Axel, and he asked the elf again. Longear said that he looked like Magnus, only a little younger. Now everything became clear to the emperor, and he replied, "Magnus was my father's name." Joy lit up the elf's face. "So that's it. You look so much like him," he admired. Axel was surprised that the elf knew his father, to which the commander said that in the old days he had met him several times in this place. The elf recalled that his father sought a cure for a disease he called dragon inheritance, and that he was kind and courteous. Ban was pleased that Magnus was also looking for ways to suppress the dragon blood. It gave him a chance to befriend the elves and speak directly about his goals. A smile blossomed on the elf's lips. He remembered that Magnus came in the same clothes as this man. He wanted to know how his father was doing. The emperor's fist clenched the dirty towel, and he said that his father had died. This upset the long-eared one a little. He looked down and said that Magnus was a wonderful person. Such familiarity enraged the man. He was already ready for a fight, but Ban cooled his ardor by asking him to listen to his father's friend. His next words shocked everyone sitting nearby, and Ban wanted to scream in panic. With a menacing look, Axel admitted that Magnus was the late Emperor of Rune. But this was not enough, and he continued to tell that he was the current Emperor of Rune, Exceltrian. Inside, Ban clutched his head in horror. He had lost control again. "Know your place, plebeian. Better take me to gospel. I have business with the great elven oracle," said the Emperor, which caused Renard to look surprised. She was a little frightened by such pressure, but she could not resist asking, "Your Majesty, weren't you planning to remain incognito?" Axel said that he didn't need it, which really shocked the girl. Horror was visible in the eyes of the elves from the words of the man, who did not understand how he could remain silent when these serfs spoke so familiarly about the late emperor. The emperor's anger grew stronger as he saw their surprised eyes. He jumped up in anger and started shouting, "They don't even teach you in your uncivilized village how to honor the emperor." A shiver ran through Ban's body from fear and admiration. He saw how proud elves fell on their knees before the stern emperor and thought that this was power. After some time, they finally found themselves in Gaspel, the capital of the Elven Kingdom, where they appeared before the Elven Elder. Gaspel is a city with a history of many thousands of years, he said. But because of the dominance of barbarians in the Bloody Forest, we are in danger, and the only people who have visited the city in thousands of years are he and his father. The Elven Lord sadly admitted that he did not even know that Magnus was an emperor. His father's name angered Excel again. He didn't want the elf to call him by his name. The emperor shuddered, then seemed to calm down a little, trying to say that he would send him to hell. But he said something else. Rinart, standing nearby, looked at the emperor with confusion. Trying to take control of Ban's body, he almost said something he didn't want to. When the elder looked at the man with his magical vision, he realized that his blood aura was indeed strong. The elf continued the conversation. "I don't know what offended you so much, but I would like to hear first what exactly you came to our city for. This is a simple precaution. We are fighting barbarians. Tell me, elf, does your head sit well on your shoulders?" Axel threatened with a grin. The elder's hand reached to his throat in fear, and a shudder ran through his body. He had not expected such a question at all. The emperor continued, "You have not yet seen my anger, because in anger, I would have already cut her off." This threat made an indelible impression on the elf. He seemed to feel how the sword was cutting him. At that moment, servants ran up to the elder, anxiously holding him by the shoulders. Tears flowed from Ban's eyes. He felt guilty that the emperor always spoke like that. The elf lord's gloomy gaze was directed at Excel again, who confidently continued to assert that the kingdom of the elves should become a vassal of his empire. The elder did not expect this. Excel's logic was simple. The orcs were raiding the elves. They would soon exterminate them, and therefore it was better to become his vassals. The elf lord jumped up in anger at these words. "Even if you are the emperor, there is a limit to what you can say. Gospel is protected by a magical barrier," he exclaimed. But Excel didn't back down. "The barrier is supported from the outside. If all the gospel elves die, your barrier will fall." The capital was indeed enveloped in a strong protective magic, in the form of a green dome. The emperor only asked if he had correctly guessed the secret of this barrier. This was a serious blow for the elf. He could not understand where this man learned all this from. But the man could only answer that he knew everything because he was the emperor. Ban thought with a smile that it was because he had read the novel. The gravity of the situation brought him back to reality. He frowned and thought that the elves would definitely die out if they didn't do anything. And if a war with the demons happened, an alliance with them would be very useful. The elder, shocked by the information that had been revealed, thought only about how this could have become known to people. The emperor confidently ordered, "Become my vassals, for we are a civilization with tens of thousands of years of history." For the long-lived elves, this was not a compelling reason. They had no intention of becoming vassals of an empire that was not even 5 centuries old. Excel, gloomy and focused, saw no difference in the centuries of history when total extermination was at stake. The elder's confidence wavered, but he could not give his consent so easily. With his arms folded across his chest and his mind reminiscing about the novel, the emperor urged the elves to make a decision and describe the events that could happen. "The barbarians of the Bloody Forest will slaughter you all, and that will be the end of your civilization." This made the elf think. He apologized and said that he could not make such a decision himself, and he needed time to gather a council. A completely fake smile adorned Excel's face. It seemed he was already ready to agree with this option. Of course, this made the elder happy. He tried to prove that this question was really important. But Excel didn't care. With the same sinister smile, he raised his hand, in which a stream of magical energy lit up. The elf realized that it was pointless to continue the dialogue, fell silent, and became covered in sweat from fear. In an attempt to calm the enraged emperor, he raised his trembling hands in a defensive gesture and said that he did not want to start a quarrel. Having extinguished the magic, Excel agreed with these arguments. He looked at the frightened elder with pride. Thus the elven kingdom was subdued. Now the emperor was giving orders, and he needed the elf to convince the elders as quickly as possible. Lowering his gaze, the long-eared one said doubtfully that he understood everything and would do it. This tone did not suit the man, and, looking menacingly, he asked the elder again. The elf understood that he needed to be more respectful, smiling and beaming. He said, "I hear and obey. I will convince the other elders at all costs. You can count on me, sir." This made Excel believe that he was going to send a messenger to Rune and send his knights for protection. Bowing deeply, the inspired elder could only obey the emperor. Having finally settled all the issues, the emperor got down to business. Renard's surprise knew no bounds. The man was still planning to enter the Emerald Ruins, leaving the girl to convince the elders. Excel's desire to enter the sacred ruins, which had been protected from outsiders for thousands of years, caused the elf to go into a frenzy of anger. A mad fire lit up the emperor's eyes. He asked again. Was the elf really against it? The elder was not going to give up just like that. No matter what the emperor did, he would not be able to let him into these ruins. But Excel's lips only touched with a smile, as if he was thinking. The emperor, his eyes flashing and wild, said that he was just a little angry. A red carpet flashed across the ground, and the elves standing on either side bowed, escorting the emperor to the entrance of the Emerald Ruins. Questions crowded in Renard's head. Didn't the elves say that they wouldn't let strangers in? Why were they suddenly so willing to cooperate? But the emperor brought her out of her reverie. She turned around when she heard her name. In His Highness's hand was a letter. He handed it to the girl, saying that it should go personally to Duran, because the life of the elves and the existence of these ruins are connected with it. Renard had doubts. She was worried that it was dangerous to be alone in the ruins. The entrance really did give off a sense of horror, and the girl claimed that she knew these ruins well, because she had been told about them since childhood. Bowing, she asked the emperor to take her with him despite all the dangers. The wind swayed the trees around him, and Excel replied that he understood everything. Pure and faithful, like her father, the girl made a huge impression on Ban with her sincere care. The emperor smiled. He knew he had to go alone to find a cure for the dragon inheritance. Raising her head, Renard looked at Excel with hope. But her hope quickly evaporated when he said that if he was ready to die, then please do so. The setting sun illuminated the smiling face of the emperor. Those who oppose his will must die, he said. The frightened girl tried to prove to Excel that she only wanted the best for him. The arrogant emperor did not agree with her at all, because only he knows what is good for him. He finished, "You think you would have entered the ruins without weighing the risks?" These words helped Renard understand her mistake. The man's attentive gaze pierced the girl. He said that he was giving her a unique opportunity. The girl looked at the emperor, not understanding what he was talking about. As if it were a precious treasure, Renard clutched the message to her chest. His Majesty commanded her to return to the rune and carry out his orders. Then she would receive his forgiveness. Excel raised his hand, threatening the girl. By running his hand over her, the man seemed to separate her head from her body, showing what would happen if he got angry. The girl froze, not daring to move. Bowing to the ground, she obeyed and immediately set out to carry out all orders. The emperor's gaze was calm and commanding. He looked at the girl bowing before him and said, "It finally dawned on you." This conversation upset Bana. In his head, he apologized to her, shedding tears. It seemed to him that the orc blood had provoked Excel, and he had become much more arrogant and hot-tempered. The sun penetrated through the treetops into the clearing where the emperor stood, and the entrance to the cave was no longer so scary. An elder approached him. Excel asked him about the treasures hidden in these ruins. The elf, of course, knew about it. He told a legend that in the depths there was hidden a miraculous elixir for all diseases. That was the plot, Ban recalled. With the help of this elixir, it would be possible to cure the dragon's heredity. Having decided to prepare everything for his return, the emperor ordered to convince the elders and continue his father's research with the elven oracle. The elder did not argue with Excel, specifying when to expect him. This made Ban think. He remembered that the hero had spent a little less than a week in the ruins. So he answered, turning to the elf, who was concerned about what the emperor would eat and drink. But the man did not answer this, and the elder did not dare to insist. "In a couple of days my warriors will arrive. I sent an order to protect your territory around the barrier so you can sleep peacefully." Excel gave his last instructions. The elf could only thank him with a bow. In conclusion, the emperor ordered that no one should be allowed into the ruins. An unusual wind touched Excel's feet from the half-open gate. He stepped forward, heading towards the unknown danger. The walls and ceiling of the cave were all covered with a layer of bright green moss. Transparent, sparkling crystal scatterings greeted the man in the cave. The moss was unusually bright and gave off a strange smell. But Excel's hand reached out to him, and he grabbed the nearest lump. He immediately swallowed it, trying not to sniff it. The emperor's face twisted and he covered his mouth. The moss tasted simply awful. Trembling all over from the disgusting taste, Ban swallowed the moss, thinking that he would never eat such a thing if it weren't in the plot. He remembered the company of adventurers from Carl's and his henchmen, By the smell, they quickly realized that it was poison. The emerald ruins were full of toxic fumes. After rummaging through her bag, the girl realized that they were running out of antidote. Carls looked at his companions with concern. One of them, named Scripps, fell trembling to the ground, unable to withstand the poisonous effects. The smell throughout the cave seemed to become even stronger. Having stopped, Carls became interested in the moss, which was not afraid of the toxic fumes. Chewing the moss with all his might, Ban tried to suppress his nausea. If he vomited, he might get poisoned. That left him no choice. Suddenly, a strange roar was heard. The cave shook. Excel concentrated. He saw giants made of stone in front of him. They were emerald soldiers. The Emperor frowned. It was impossible to kill them because the pieces immediately grew back. Now, knowing all this, a smile blossomed on the man's lips, and his eyes lit up with a crazy light. He was going to check what these giants were capable of. Ban smiled in his soul. According to the plot, Carls was clearing the cave. He was interested to see who was stronger. Excel's quick jerk almost made the man feel sick, but all he could say was for the Emperor to slow down. At this time, the sun was shining over the demon castle. On the huge throne in the main hall sat the demon general, listening to the report about Clun, whom he had sent to the imperial palace under the guise of the prime minister. His subject bowed and said that the Emperor of Rune had beheaded Clun. This information shocked the general. He knew that Clun was an unrivaled werewolf. Unfortunately, the demon knew nothing about this, but he heard that it was simply the Emperor's personal dislike for the prime minister. Now everything became clear to the general. He had heard a lot about the Emperor's madness. All that was left was to send another werewolf. Now we must focus on the prophecy of the chosen messenger of light. This person will be the strongest antagonist of the demons, the general reasoned. He also ordered the redeployment of all werewolves of the Rune Empire to the temple of the God of Light, something his subject did not expect at all. The divine light just at this time touched Carls. While still an ordinary boy, he already saw the beginning of his path. But the demons had already opened a hunt for him. The stone blocks that were golems easily flew apart in the air, gradually disintegrating into small pieces. So far, only the sparkling central stone remains. Exil laughed madly as he mocked Carls, air currents swirling around him. He shouted that he would destroy them all, confidently standing in the path of the stone giants. Magic was reflected in his blue eyes. The golems closed ranks around him, trapping the man in a stone prison. But a bright light illuminated the vaults of the cave, and a huge explosion blew the giants to pieces. Only stones fell to the ground through the smoke. This didn't help either. The stones crashed together again. The Emperor just scratched his head. He didn't like fighting the orcs that much because they died too quickly. For Excel, this was a real holiday. He was happy that the golems would recover no matter how many times he killed them. Ban, not expecting this, was delighted by this scene. The Emperor stood in the middle of the cave and watched as the boulders turned into monsters again. A ball of wind was being collected in the Emperor's hand with the help of magic, and he was shouting that he had not played enough yet. Ban, overwhelmed with emotion, clenched his teeth and tried to pull himself together. It was becoming increasingly difficult for him to control Excel. Out of fear, the man felt as if he was in the mouth of a huge beast, and thoughts flashed through his head that if they got stuck here, the dragon's blood would rage. Ban's hand trembled, as if he had become accustomed to the Emperor's cruelty. He recalled that one of Carl's assistants had figured out how to hit the golems with their mana cores. While the broken giants were gathering, Carls heard her. In the center of the golems' chests, there was a shining stone. Enveloped in magic, Excel flew up into the cave. Now he knew what to do. After the battle was over, the Emperor, enveloped in a magical wind, froze with his eyes closed. A real storm was dying down around him. The man exhaled. He had to be careful or else his dragon heritage would make him possessed. Having rested, the Emperor stepped further, to the next entrance. Inside, there was a huge poisonous pink lake, in which some kind of animal was swimming. In order to cross this lake, Ban knew a hint. He had to saddle this beast, the bone eel, and hold on until it took him there. Excel managed to do it with ease. He didn't even have to hold on. The next room was a swamp inhabited by strange creatures. Mudmen. Ban remembered which mudmen didn't sink when you stepped on them, and with this they easily passed through the swamp. Now they found themselves in a huge hall with columns, the gatekeeper's hall. The Emperor was impatient to go down deeper. He stopped at the stairs going down. In the previous halls, everything was simple, but here he became wary. In the dark depths lived monsters that even caused a lot of trouble for Carls. An unusual mechanism was moving up the stairs from the darkness. The worried man immediately took out his sword. The metal blades rustled. A humanoid robot appeared before them. It was a complete surprise to Ban. He didn't know what it was. The huge lens where the head was lit up, the robot analyzed its target, Son of the Dragon. With a mechanical voice it said, Dragon blood activity 25.8%. S-rank blood aura user. The Emperor's frowning gaze fell on this creature. He did not understand his words at all. Future man, I greet you. I am the guardian of Zeta 0729. I guard this gate, the robot introduced himself. His name was unusual for Excel. Ban didn't remember such a name from the book, but the mechanism continued to tell. Guardian Zeta 0729 has a service life of 7 to 14 days. About 2 years, I recorded the movement and rose. Finally, I can complete the task. A shudder ran through the man's body. This robot was in the book. Only broken and smashed, it lay in the corner. The travelers could not understand what it was. When they examined it, they realized that it was not working and was not moving. Before anything happened, they quickly moved on. Everything came together in Ban's head. It really was the same robot. It's just that Carl's got there 2 years later and the guard had already stopped working. The lens in the robot's head sparkled as he analyzed his opponent. I see that you have resistance to poison, man of the future. I will begin the task. Excel asked what the robot's task was. Beginning task, Gatekeeper, the robot said, and its lens lit up red. The Gatekeeper had no intention of letting strangers in. His mechanical body filled with power. I knew this wouldn't end well, Ban thought, upset. In order to go further, it was necessary to defeat him, the guard clarified. This only made the Emperor smile. Everything became clear to him. A huge sword glowed blue in the robot's hand. Excel had never seen anything like this before, and he prepared for battle. Swinging its light blade, the mechanism jumped up, aiming at the man. The Emperor concentrated and blocked the attack. This shook the man. There was a lot of strength in the guard. Looking into the glowing red lens, similar to an eye, the man understood that this was a dangerous opponent. Retreating, Excel jumped away from the robot. For this attack, the Gatekeeper was able to assess his strength, fighting ability, and the increased level of dragon blood activity. The Emperor's sword became coated with magic, and his opponent realized that it was dangerous. The man was overwhelmed with power. Ban had only seen such techniques in fantasy. Excel had no other choice. He had to use all his magic to not let the battle drag on. With a scream, he sent a huge wave towards the robot, sweeping away everything in its path. Light enveloped the guard. The blow crashed into him. From such force, cracks appeared on the walls of the room. Now it was clear that the mechanism was covered with protection. By putting his hands forward, he blocked the blow. But the most powerful magic still made a hole in his defense. The robot was covered in scratches but still stood. The Emperor, who had spent half of his blood aura, looked at his sword. This blow had taken a lot of strength. All scratched up, the guard smoked and sparked, counting the damage that proved fatal, which led to the completion of the work. The robot's body was holding on with its last strength. Excel asked if he had any last words. There was a red ball lying on the palm of the mechanism. He held it out, asking to take it. And then the Gatekeeper fell to the ground, and the ball rolled along the ground. His last words were heard. There is a secret door in these ruins. My eye will lead you there. In the very depths of the ruins, there is a secret door behind which you will find the elixir of the ancients. The man looked up, the robot's voice gradually fading. When he disconnected, he only asked to find something and finish it. Ban couldn't figure out what was going on. He knew there was no hidden door in the plot. After the victory, the Emperor moved on, down the long staircase. Below, he was met by another dark passage. Strange smoke was pouring out of there. Excel even had to cover his eyes with his hand. In this hall of the sand cloud, there lived a giant worm, a very strong monster. Moving under the sand, he suddenly attacked Carls and his companions. The round hall filled with sand was huge, and the exit on the other side was about 3 kilometers away. Magic flashed red on the Emperor's blade. He raised his sword, at the tip of which a destructive blood aura jade sparkled. The blow flew sharply straight into the sand, causing a huge explosion. Clouds of sand and dust rose up. There was a grinding sound, and a huge monster with terrible fangs appeared from the sand. It was a giant worm. Running to the side, Excel sent another explosion. The Emperor moved forward, driving away the monster with explosions. His tactics were simple. He just had to get to the entrance because the worm couldn't get out of the hall. Without much effort, Excel quickly ran to the exit. Out of breath, the Emperor decided to catch his breath before the next door. He was filled with excitement before the last hall. Having calmed down, the man opened the door. There, on a small elevation, stood a green bottle, all sparkling and covered with precious stones. Excel slowly approached her. He grabbed the bottle and shook it. wondering if it really was the elixir. But then a sound echoed throughout the room. "Hello, if you can hear me, raise your hand." Ban looked around. This was also not in the plot, and the voice continued. "I am the system that controls these ruins. You might be surprised by my existence, because my essence is very difficult to understand." The Emperor rolled his eyes. For the first time, the opinions of the body's owners coincided. This voice was too arrogant. "Do you want me to send you to hell for your insolence? I am the Emperor, and I know everything. You are some kind of operating system, right?" asked Excel. The system did not expect that they would understand her, but then she remembered that he was actually a man of the future. The man was eagerly trying to find out what these ruins really were. In response to the question, the mysterious voice said that the ruins were created by peoples, and the operating system can exist for another 2 years. At these words, the Emperor remembered the robot, who was also supposed to die in 2 years. The system continued its story. "It was supposed to be like this, but now I can fulfill my task. To transmit information to the man of the future, and therefore, I will disappear." She told about the elixir of the ancients that Excel held in his hands and about its magical properties. This elixir was endowed with the magical power of the ancestors. By drinking it, you gain the ability to regenerate and neutralize any poisons, diseases, and injuries. For the Emperor, the main thing was that he would cure the dragon's blood. The system confirmed that even a severed limb will grow back in 60 days. Looking at this unusual liquid, Ban again remembered the novel. There, Princess Scripps drank the elixir and turned into an invincible warrior. She easily destroyed enemies. She was called the Goddess of Battles. Such was the power of the elixir. The glass of the bottle reflected the Emperor's uncertain face. But there was no time to doubt. He had to solve his problems, and the whole bottle of elixir was drunk. Placing the empty bottle back on the pedestal, the man asked why the ancients didn't survive if they had such technology. The system could not answer this question, but only asked to pay attention to the creatures in the ruins. Indeed, these were truly strange organisms, Ban recalled. The system said that even if you kill them, they still revive every 2 months. Their corpses contain many valuable components. They will be useful in the war against demons. This made Excel wary. How could she know about the demon war? In response, the system said that it was destined to be so. Trying to find out the answers, he asked again, but it was useless. All that was left was to conclude that the ancients were exterminated by demons. The voice could not answer this either. He only said, "If you find some ruins and get to the deepest room, you will get answers. Just remember that you have no more than 2 years. Otherwise, the system stops working." Having said this, the voice fell silent. The Emperor decided that the system's task was completed. Excel's hair stood on end as he suddenly felt strange changes in his body. His blood aura had completely recovered. Although it used to take 2 days, the elixir was truly amazing. As he looked around the hall, the Emperor remembered that the robot had said something about a secret door. There was a small dark hole on the ground, and the man decided that this was it. When he inserted the golem's eye into the hole, a hole opened. The stairs led into a dark, secret tunnel. There was only darkness around when a strange sound was heard, and blue lights appeared above. "Welcome to our dungeon. It is only accessible to those who were able to defeat Zeta 0729, said another voice. A hologram of a robot suddenly flashed on the ground, and he offered to receive a superpower. "What ability?" Excel asked. The robot answered that it is a scan that helps to see what abilities others have. In the last battle, the golem actually used such an ability. Of course, this could be useful. The Emperor agreed without hesitation. A hologram hand landed on the man's head and said that once the transmission was complete, the man would be transported to the surface. Then a terrible pain pierced Excel's head. His body shook with terrible sensations. He bent over, clutching his head. The Emperor passed out and floated in the air. Before his eyes, words flashed in the darkness. System loading complete. New superpower added. Scan. The first thing he heard was someone calling him. Then he opened his eyes. The setting sun was shining in the sky. It turned out that he was being called by an elven elder, who was asking with concern whether His Highness had come to his senses. The man did not expect to see him and tried to get up. The Emperor's head ached terribly. He remembered his new ability. When the Emperor finally stood up, the elf asked him in shock, "Your Majesty, what happened to your eyes?" But Excel didn't feel any change. They approached the river, and the elder suggested that the man take a look for himself. In the waters of the river, he saw that his previously blue eyes were glowing with an otherworldly light. Strange shimmers sparkled in their depths. This really surprised the Emperor. A strange voice inside his head said, "Synchronization completed. The ability implementation was successful." He turned to the elf. thinking that he had said something, but he was also surprised. And then, a blue screen appeared in the air above the oracle, on which all the information was written: name, race, physical abilities, dragon blood, and magical power. Now Excel understood what the scan looked like. The voice also added that the testing was complete. The elf noticed that the glow in His Highness's eyes had disappeared, but the Emperor reassured the worried elder. In the reflection, Excel looked at his stats. The dragon blood was still at a high level. This worried him. But everything was fine. His head had noticeably cleared up, and there was no feeling that he would break into anger. At least he had prevented madness. With a smile, the man decided to share the good news with the oracle. But then elves ran out of the forest, shouting that trouble had happened. Kneeling before their leader, they reported that barbarians had attacked. The elder immediately began to find out what the signs were and from which side the barbarians were attacking. With horror, the elf admitted that they were attacking from both sides and that the barbarians were different this time. Exceltrian raised his hand, interrupting the worried soldier. "Stop yelling! You should be ashamed! Our troops easily deal with the barbarians," he exclaimed, ordering a messenger to be sent to the Empire asking for reinforcements. The Blood Forest elves in the story are supposed to be exterminated by 413, all because the demons began to control the barbarians, giving them new powers. The enemies appeared much earlier. These events should have happened in 4 years. If it was because of him, Ban could not remain inactive. Having decided this for himself, he asked the name of the most confident elf, who introduced himself as Grickle. He resolutely ordered that he be taken to the attacked city. While they were running, the Emperor was thinking about battle tactics. A map was being built in his head. Excel thought to call for help from Karl's ally, Princess Scrip of Saphigold. Ahead, houses engulfed in flames appeared, and the elf said that this was the city under attack. Everything around was ablaze. People were trying to defend themselves from the huge orcs. The Emperor ordered the children to be gathered in the city center, and Grickle ran to carry out the order. The magicians tried to put up a barrier to at least delay the enemies a little. Pushing off the ground, Excel suddenly rushed forward. He ordered to leave, standing between the elves and the barbarians. The residents asked who it was, and he decided to save them. Furiously attacking the first orc with his blade, the man replied that he was their emperor. "Go to Gaspel at once," Excel ordered, but the frightened elves said they could not leave. Then turning around with a crazy look, he threatened to kill them. The residents could only bow and obey. They ran out of the city. The man made sure that no one remained. Now there were only orcs here, and the emperor could calmly deal with them. The barbarian attacked with a huge club, but Excel easily dodged it, and he himself went into battle, piercing the orc with his sword. He swung his blade quickly, cutting through his enemies. Blood spurted in all directions as the emperor struck down the barbarians without missing. A huge orc stood in his way, but the man decapitated him with a light swing of his sword. He ran forward and looked around. It seemed like everything was over. There were only body parts and weapons lying around. The emperor's foot easily crushed the orc's head. Bana was overcome with horror. He was not at all used to seeing such bloody scenes. Blood was dripping from Excel's boots. A rustling sound in the bushes made the man turn around. Someone tried to hit him with a huge paw, but the emperor managed to duck. The sudden attack of the possessed trolls shocked Excel, and he did not notice that another one was approaching from behind, swinging a club. A sharp blow sent the man flying. But he managed to stay on his feet, spitting blood out of his mouth. Anger filled the emperor. His pupils narrowed, and his magic went out of control. Ban tried to restrain him, but it was useless. Excel's anger grew. But then something in my heart seemed to glow with a soft green light. Calmness slowly spread through his veins. Ban realized that the elixir was suppressing the fury of his blood. But this did not heal him completely. The emperor was still barely able to stand on his feet. The pain was really annoying for Excel. He still had a lot to do, and the number of orcs and trolls grew. The man realized that he could not fight in this state and he needed to run, but his legs suddenly stopped moving. The emperor had no intention of turning his back on the enemy. He looked forward with a stern gaze. Trolls and orcs attacked him. Banu could only scream in his head. Suddenly, a spear filled with blood magic flew out from somewhere. It fell and pierced the attacking orc, raising a fountain of blood and stopping the attack. The spear, stuck into the ground, emitted powerful magic. Here 3 people landed in front of Excel. These are the Knights of the White Dragon. Renart, Ingress, and Sizz came to the rescue. Immediately, the Emperor ordered Ingress to take on the enemies from one side. He sent Sizz and Renart to Maple Leaf City with orders to protect the elves. Instantly, they set off to carry out Excel's will. Ingress's face showed admiration for the Emperor. Now he resembled his father. The club that they were going to hit the knight with broke into pieces. It was the Emperor who covered Ingress, shouting at him not to yawn. Hearing him, the knight grabbed the spear. He looked forward boldly and was going to crush the enemy. After the battle was over, the elves treated their wounds. The White Dragon Knights knelt before the Emperor. They told him that there were difficulties with the teleportation and apologized for being late. The angry Emperor asked who was issuing permission to use the teleport in his absence. The knights admitted that it was usually the Prime Minister, but the Emperor killed him and someone had to take his place. Ingress admitted that it was Sir Bios. In Ban's memories, he was a confident, fair-haired, middle-aged man. He had extensive connections. He was also interested in science. And he was a talented leader, the president of the greatest academy in the Empire. In the book, he left the Empire by sacrificing his title. But this time he must become a loyal servant. Ban chuckled. He did not get angry with the knights, for which they were very grateful. Looking through their characteristics with the help of his new ability, the man realized that they were very good. The serious Ingress asked if His Highness had been in the ruins. The Emperor said that he had been there and drunk the elixir of the ancients, and this information pleased his subjects. Excel also ordered them to stay and protect the elves. Turning around, he was about to return to the palace. A magical teleportation seal lit up in front of the man. The golden light of magic absorbed him and transported him back to Rune. Immediately upon his return, the Emperor went to eat and at the same time invited Sir Bios to chat. The man offered to treat himself, and the minister thanked him. He began to carefully eat the exquisite imperial dishes. Watching him, Ban thought that he had to make him his own man at any cost. Bios was tormented by doubts, and he decided to ask whether he was worthy of such a position as Prime Minister. It was important to Excel that he deal with state affairs, but this seemed to surprise the minister. He argued that in politics there must be a certain vector, what to focus on, who to support. But for the Emperor, these were stupid questions, and in order to answer them, he appointed a Prime Minister. Agreeing with this, Bion bowed his head. Then, Excel began to tell the latest news, that the elves accepted citizenship of the Empire, and the Emerald Ruins are now part of them. He ordered the monsters from the ruins to be used to prepare for war, to which the minister asked with surprise what kind of war awaited them. In response, the Emperor told about the war with demons, and that there was 1 year left before it began. Bion was shocked by such confidence. Of course, Ban couldn't say that he had read the novel many times, and he just said that he knows everything because he is the Emperor. Perhaps you have spies among the demons, the minister decided to ask. But Excel did not answer and left everything to Bion's imagination. The Emperor was not at all what the official thought. The man chuckled at this, getting up from the table and asked, "Did you also believe that I was crazy?" Sir Bion admitted with the utmost honesty that he truly believed this. But now, having bent his knee, he was going to serve faithfully and truly for the good of the Empire. This softened the Emperor, and he decided not to punish the minister. The Saphigold Empire would soon send its ambassador, as the Blood Forest was their territory, said Bion, who was going to take over diplomacy. Only Excel decided to do it himself. The worried minister was not against it, but he thought it could be a declaration of war. Ban stated with confidence that there would be no war. Soon the ambassador of the Sapphire Empire arrived at the castle walls. This was a crucial moment. The man must not let Bion down and start a war. The door to the chambers swung open with a sharp kick. The man who entered with an angry face began to shout, "You have outraged the Saphigold Empire. We have heard about your madness, but do you really want war?" Shouting at the Emperor, he introduced himself as Barza and said that he would fight him to the end. That name, Ban's memories stirred, was the name of the 5th demon general. In the future, he will betray humanity and side with the demons. Excel grabbed the blade, intending to kill him. Rising from the throne, he easily cut down the ambassador. This shocked the minister, because he thought that the Emperor would not start a war. Barza was mortally wounded. Walking calmly back to the throne, Ban thought in horror that this was the end. His subjects shouted that he deserved it for daring to insult the Emperor. Now that war was inevitable, Bion wanted the Emperor to send a letter explaining the reason for the ambassador's murder. One of the officials objected that Emperor Saphigold himself should bear responsibility for sending some scoundrel. Excel called them to calm down, saying that he would resolve the issue. And he called Bion, who came forward readily. In the Emperor's hand was a letter which he ordered to be sent to Saphigold. With a bow, the minister was about to fulfill the Emperor's will. Bion did not return alone. He went to Exceltrion reading the letter. He thought that the ambassador should not have been killed, but surprisingly Sapphire Gold only sent a letter and a girl. She was chained but beautiful, tall, with dark hair. Knocking on the Emperor's chambers, Bion shouted that the envoy of the Saphigold Empire had arrived. The man immediately recognized the girl. It was Princess Scripps. She only bowed with a sad, emaciated face. In the future, this princess became an ally of Carl's. Already at the age of 7, she showed signs of possessing a dragon inheritance of great power. As she grew older, she lost control of herself and killed many people, and soon she became an outcast in her own country. This sad story really upset the emperor. There was no end to the outbursts of aggression, and she decided to chain herself up. Ban looked at her and remembered that according to the plot, she drank the elixir and was healed. His gaze became completely sad. He felt very sorry for the girl. Suddenly, the princess's eyes rolled back and she staggered, falling. Shouting for water, Excel ran up to her with concern. A glass of clean water was immediately served to His Majesty. With care, the emperor offered it to the girl, who was so dehydrated that she could barely speak. But after thanking him, she refused. Excel asked to explain why. Scripps said that if you drink a lot of water, your strength will return and your dragon blood will rage. But the man did not retreat. He was confident that he could win. He ordered the maids to bring more water. In the letter, Bayon lamented that Emperor Saphigold was asking for the princess to be executed. But Excel decided that it would be better to make her a concubine. To the emperor's surprise, the minister replied that this was impossible, and he explained that everyone in the empire had heard about the brutal murders of the princess, which made her an outcast in Sapphire Gold, and therefore marrying her was a bad idea. This was familiar to Excel. He chuckled, remembering that in every empire there are similar stories. Bayon clutched his head and asked what His Majesty intended to do. After all, the last chance to end the war is to fulfill the conditions from the letter of King Magus Sapogolski, who asks to do whatever he wants with the princess. And the question of marriage is a long matter, the minister continued. Understanding this, Excel asked what to do with her then, which made Bayon incredibly happy, as he was immediately ready to give advice. Now free, Scripps sat in the summer garden watching the butterflies. Ban looked at her joyfully. That her healthy blush had returned to her. At least she became more human-like, Excel decided. This treatment of his beloved heroine angered Ban. Noticing the emperor, the princess immediately bowed in gratitude. Now the man noticed the chains on her hands. They were wrapped around her forearms like bracers. She wanted to explain it, but Excel said that he didn't care. The main thing was that she didn't shackle herself completely, like before. The saddened girl asked what would happen to her next, to which the emperor said that the prime minister had offered to grant her a title. This surprised the girl, but the man explained that this was necessary so that he could marry her in 2 years. This news made the girl happy. She did not expect that Her Majesty would take her as his wife. "I accept you into my empire because you are strong," Axel admitted. Strong warriors are needed because the Rune Empire has the longest border with the demon world, which is growing in power, the emperor said. But Scripps was not convinced. "You have so many strong warriors, your knights are legendary." The ability to analyze lit up the man's eyes. Her characteristics were high. To calm the girl, he said that he felt great power in her, but she replied that she had never been able to control it. Understanding the princess's concern, he said, "Stay close to me, and together we will go to war against the demons." Smiling, Excel complimented her, saying that she was beautiful enough to be his wife. Ban was ready to marry the girl right now. "She should be proud of herself since the Emperor of Rune himself chose her," said Excel, which terribly embarrassed the princess. The Emperor himself blushed at these words, but Ban only laughed in his head. The man turned around and walked forward, calling the girl to follow him to the Imperial Laboratory. He explained to the interested girl that the Elven Oracle would lift the curse from her. The words about curing the dragon's inheritance made such a strong impression on Scripps that she began to cry. Saying thank you again, the princess followed the man. The laboratory was filled with smoke. A concentrated elf in protective glasses leaned over the table. He dripped something into multicolored test tubes, checking the results. A thoughtful young man stood next to the oracle. The interested princess decided to come closer, and the emperor remained to the side. The liquid in the test tubes began to smoke, and the scientists said that the reaction showed a decrease in potential. The young man beamed and explained to the girl that in 4 days, the strength of her dragon blood had dropped to 2%. This guy's name was Rugesta. He was a knight of the Order of White Dragons and defended his dissertation on the theory of dragon heredity. Smiling, he began to congratulate the princess and the emperor. The dejected girl considered herself merely an outcast and not a princess. Excel immediately began to clarify how many doses of the medicine the scientist could produce, to which he replied that it would last for about 30 days. But this did not suit the emperor, and the elf immediately began to prove that the necessary herbs grow only in gospel and in small quantities. He said that all the herbs of the gospel are needed, and that very small amounts of the required substance are obtained from them. Excel decided to find out if these herbs grow in the Emerald Ruins, to which he was answered in the affirmative. He gave an authoritative order to go into the ruins and collect plants. Rugest bowed and obeyed the emperor. At the same time, magic was shining brightly in the temple. A girl of unearthly beauty sat in the center of the magical seal, and the power tousled her long hair in bright flashes. Priests in cassocks stood around, looking at this with admiration. When the magical light went out, they all headed towards the girl. The saint? Trying to find out what she saw. The gods spoke to her, she replied, but the priests wanted to know the details. The one for whom the sword is intended will soon cross the threshold of the temple, so he said. The girl pointed to the sword hovering above the floor. Everyone was happy. Finally, the Knight of Light would be born. But one monk distinguished himself. He stepped forward, stopping them. It seemed to him that this was not a good sign, and that the future war would be even bloodier. And the saint confirmed this by telling about the war with demons. The Sword of Light and its mysterious master were the only hope. Right there, not far away, the teleport gate was activated. Exceltrion emerged from them, striding forward quickly. He was heading to the Temple of Light, which is located in Lowenheim, on the western border of Safigold, in order to meet Karls, who will remove the seal from the Sword of Light. And he will become an incomparable knight, and Ban must make him his ally, because the Sword of Light is the greatest weapon against demons. But Karls cannot cope alone. The war will wipe out many nations. This time, the man was going to change everything. He had a perfect plan. The peacetime would last longer and Karls would become stronger. According to the plot of the novel, after 3 years, the Knight of Light will receive divine illumination in the temple. He is only 13 years old now, so if we start training him now, he will grow up much stronger. All these plans worried Ban. He knew that he couldn't cope alone. To find out everything, it was necessary to find the temple. But then there was a terrible roar, and the earth trembled. Smoke rose into the sky, and the man realized that it was all coming from the temple. Buildings were burning, people were running away screaming. However, the emperor fled towards danger. Rivers of blood flowed on the ground. The city was engulfed in flames. Excel froze in the middle of the street. A strange feeling came over him. There were demons in the sky, and a man was screaming in their clutches. The emperor looked at this in horror. The demons saw him and smiled maliciously. This made the man incredibly angry, and he was going to kill all the demons. This feeling of all-consuming hatred surprised Ban. Of course, he hated them too and had to kill them. But even when Excel killed the orcs, he was not so angry. The body rushed forward towards the enemy before Ban could think. Magic shone in the emperor's hand. Ban looked at the blood aura in shock. Every time this happened, Excel would emit a silver aura that helped him sense demons and caused him to feel a burning hatred towards them. Panic gripped the man. He couldn't stop it. Knights had already come out to defend the city. They were going to stop the enemies before they broke through to the temple. The emperor already held the bodies of dead demons in his hands. He no longer had the strength to hold back. Accelerating himself with magic, he suddenly rushed upward. Another demon fell at the hands of Excel. He was not going to leave anyone alive. A mage from the infantry detachment, who had not expected this, appeared nearby. After scanning it, the emperor realized that it was also a werewolf. The man had already met with them more than once, and the next meeting made him furious. Cutting the demon, he ran towards him. A silver aura followed the emperor. The werewolf did not expect this. He thought that the city was checked for the presence of carriers of this power. Putting his blade to the demon's throat, Excel asked, "Who among the people of the empire here has the strongest silver aura?" The werewolf grinned and was not going to answer. The demon standing next to him answered for him, trembling. He admitted that on the entire continent, there was only one such person. Rune Emperor Exceltrion said the demon as the man cut him in half. With burning eyes and a sinister smile, the emperor admitted that it was he. Swinging his blade, the man explained that the demon recognized him and was instantly killed. In fear, the werewolf Actus ordered the death of Excel and the demons went on the attack. But the emperor, swinging his sword with ease, did not even let them get close to him. He slashed at demons non-stop. With a smile, he realized that he didn't even need to see them. He felt everything. Suddenly, a spear flew from somewhere, but the emperor managed to dodge. And the spear hit the demon straight. The enemy, covered in blood, fell with a growl. Now only Actus remained in the man's path. Excel chuckled. "Did you really plan to break into the temple with such a small number?" The werewolf's face was filled with fear. He did not believe that his brothers were killed so quickly. Looking up at the sky, he ordered the remaining demons to kill the emperor. Spreading their wings, they rushed at him. Dozens of spears were aimed at the emperor, but he could see perfectly well where they would strike. The silver aura truly amazed Ban. He dodged attacks effortlessly, as if he could see the future. He blocked the sword with a clang. The hand shot up into the air, and Excel grabbed the spear aimed straight at him. The demons couldn't understand what was happening. Even the werewolf was shocked at how he caught the spear. The Emperor enveloped him in silver magic. Power crackled in the weapon as Excel swung, and with all his might he sent the spear upward. Ban panicked and didn't understand why he threw it into the sky. With a grin, Actus thought that the Emperor had missed. The spear whistled into the crowd of demons, and then there was a loud explosion, and pieces of bodies flew to the ground. Ban and the werewolf were speechless in amazement. The Emperor laughed, throwing his head back and looking at the falling parts of the demons. He shouted, "What a magnificent view!" This gave Banu confidence and he laughed too. Gritting his teeth in anger, Actus could only repeat, "How dare you!" Having pulled himself together, the demon ordered the summoning to begin. The remaining demons pierced themselves with their spears. The werewolf also plunged the weapon into his heart. This struck the Emperor. He wondered, are they all sacrificing themselves? Blood continued to flow from their dead bodies, seeming to merge into one stream. It was spinning into an endless bloody spiral. Horror gripped Excel. He felt something dangerous was approaching. He wanted to run away from there, but he heard someone's voices. The knights approached him, rejoicing at their salvation and the killing of the demons. The man looked at them angrily and drove them away, calling them serfs and plebeians. This attitude infuriated the knights guardians of the temple. The Emperor had just said what he had warned when a real tsunami of blood erupted around him. It covered people who didn't understand anything. Unable to escape, they drowned in this bloody ocean. There were cries and requests for help all around. The Emperor, standing on his feet, wanted to help them. But the blood suddenly turned into a river again and flowed. The knights screamed, trying to get out. But it was all useless. It was as if they were being sucked into the depths. When all the blood was gone, a mysterious black hole could be seen. Ban's skin crawled with fear. Blackness began to spread around the strange hole. The earth shook from such magic. A huge hand emerged from the black gate, and someone growled, "More!" Gradually, a body appeared, insanely large, all in folds of skin. Finally, the creature stood up to its full height. It towered over Excel like a tower, and on its belly there was a gaping mouth full of fangs. The creature called itself Epicron and growled, demanding blood. "This is one of the princes of hell, the prince of gluttony," Ban recalled in panic. Not far away in the temple, deep underground, the saint and the monks bowed before the sword, feeling the earthquake. The girl closed her eyes and prayed to the god of light for salvation. And then the sword of light came to life, glowed, filled with magic. The saint opened her mouth and froze in shock. Her eyes rolled back and she let out a scream. The monks rushed to her aid, trying to understand what had happened. Standing up as if under hypnosis, Liena approached the sword saying, "I have been given an epiphany." One of the monks tried to stop her, shouting that the sword would kill anyone except the chosen one of light. But the girl said that everything was fine and grabbed the sword. The blade trembled in her hands. Waves of magic enveloped him. The people standing nearby could not believe it. The amazed monk looked at this scene, unable to understand why the sword did not reject her hands. Liena explained that God had chosen her and she must take the sword to the master. Then she headed forward towards the exit. The priests immediately decided that the chosen one was in the temple, but the girl replied that he was outside. The alarmed men tried to restrain the saint because there were demons there. But after apologizing, she rushed towards the exit. Holding the sword, the saint ran up the stairs. She felt that if she did not find the chosen one now, many people would die. Chaos reigned in the burning city. A huge boulder flew past with a whistle and crashed into the tower. The mad giant stood before the Emperor, throwing stones at him. He swung his arm, cutting through the air with a whistle, and he clenched his fist, the size of a man. Epicron abruptly brought his fist down on the man, but he managed to jump aside. Covering himself with his hands, Excel decided that he had to block the next blow. A giant palm covered the sky above him, and she dropped down trying to slap the Emperor, but he blocked it with his sword. There was a crunching sound. The man's hand could not withstand such force and the bone broke. From such a blow, he slid further, holding on with the help of the blade. The power of the elixir healed his wounds, but the demon was much stronger. The Prince of Hell demanded food. Liquid flowed from his mouth onto his stomach. It splashed out in a huge wave. Excel understood that one more blow and he would be finished. The only way to escape this was to jump up. Having landed on the ground, he was immediately covered by a huge shadow. The Emperor turned around, not expecting the blow. Epicron saw him and, clasping his hands, struck him with all his might. The blow sent the man flying into the air. With a bang, he hit the ground. The road beneath the body was covered in cracks, and blood was flowing from the Emperor's mouth. The giant's hands were like two sledgehammers, and now he was heading towards Excel. He activated the power and looked at its skills. The monster was very strong. The Emperor tried to calm down and looked for a chance to win. To do this, it was necessary to hit its core, which was located in the mouth on its stomach. The knights came running trying to protect the Temple of Light. They thought it was a huge fat ogre. The monster who turned around was really angry at such words. Blood gushed from his stomach. With screams, the soldiers drowned in it. They were sucked into the monster's huge, bottomless mouth. The Emperor sat down and gathered his strength until he felt it was time to act. The man pushed off the ground with force. Realizing that the monster was distracted, he aimed at the back of its head. Then a girl's voice was heard. "Catch it!" she shouted, and threw the sword at Axel. The Emperor, not expecting this, grabbed the blade in his left hand, intending to use it. Trying to activate it, he poured in magic. But the sword did not accept it, but only attacked in response. The man screamed and fell to the ground, exhausted. He fell, landing painfully. Excel looked at the sword, uncomprehending. He clutched his head and felt terrible pain. Words flashed through his mind. Synchronization impossible. Too high concentration of dragon blood. 37% chance of brain death. "What nonsense is this in my head?" cried the Emperor. The words kept coming up. Contact capability detected. Neural connections synced 14%. Neural connections partially severed. The elixir is part of the blood. The probability of brain death is 9%. The man's head was bursting with pain. He was overwhelmed with information. Synchronization of neural connections 20%. Congratulations, you know some of the functions of the demon hunter, also known as the Sword of Light. The girl anxiously tried to find out how the man was feeling. But he looked at her angrily and asked, "Is this a Sword of Light?" The saint responded with consent and beamed with joy. This horrified man, he could have died from this. Licking his lips, the Prince of Hell felt satisfied as he prepared to eat another human. Leaning on his sword, the Emperor tried to get up. It was a shame that he missed the best chance to kill the monster, and he already raised his hand for a new attack. The giant was already hitting like that, and it was very difficult to avoid the shockwave. Excel had no choice but to use the Sword of Light. Epicron's open palm was right in front of him. He swung and hit her, and he ran on, and the monster screamed, "How dare you!" Blood gushed from his cut arm, turning into a river. But the Emperor cut her with his blade. He was not going to fall for it again. Epicron clenched his fist, preparing to strike. Then a golden glow of magic flared up around the man. It was Liana who helped him with divine power. The Emperor's eyes flashed. This was the last chance to break through to the core of the creature. He swung and hit it with all his might. The power of Excel Trion was incredible. The sword literally passed through the giant's body. The huge carcass fell to its knees. With a hole in his body, the giant was already dead. Ban, breathing heavily, wanted to get away from him. Suddenly, his body was engulfed in magic. Notifications flashed in his head. The elixir's effect coefficient has been reduced to 0. Changes are occurring in your body. Pain shot through Ban's head and he screamed. The magic shone brighter and brighter. Something was happening to the Emperor's body. Long claws grew on his fingers instead of nails. The hands were covered with hard scales that tore the clothes. Scales also appeared on my legs, breaking through the dense tissue. The man's eyes rolled back. He couldn't stop it. When the transformation was over, Excel sank heavily to the ground. But flashes of magic immediately surrounded him. An inhuman roar came from the Emperor's throat. His mouth with huge fangs opened in a grin. Without even drawing his sword, he easily cut the dead giant in half. There was only one thought left in his head. He would kill them all. With his fangs, like an animal, Excel tore at the monster's flesh. It seems he tried not to leave a single piece of it, and then fell into darkness. Slowly the man opened his eyes. The sky was already breaking dawn when he came to his senses. The Emperor rose and looked around. Around him were the bloody remains of the Prince of Hell. In Ban's memory, the only thing that remained was that his body had changed. Everything that had happened seemed like a vision. A voice came from the monster's head. "A pathetic little human, you dared to kill me." Excel was surprised that he hadn't died yet. His one eye lit up. The giant wanted to say something else. Only the Emperor did not give in, mercilessly crushing the remains. There was the sound of hooves and the clanking of armor as knights rushed to help. They stopped at the temple, ready to fight. The commander-in-chief drew his sword and asked, "Where did the demons go?" Standing in the middle of the bloody carnage, the Emperor grinned. "Don't you see? I killed them." Such words stunned the warriors. because there was a whole army of monsters. On the soldiers' chests glittered a badge with 3 intertwined dragons. The man recognized the sign. It was the Knights of Saphigold. He asked if the princes were with them. The warriors, not expecting such treatment, tried to find out who he was. But then a young man stepped out of the line and introduced himself as Prince Portro. To the soldiers' surprise, when the prince asked him about his name, the man easily confessed. When they didn't quite understand who he was, the man had to say that he was the Emperor of Rune, Exceltrian, and then get down to business, continuing, "I have a way to cure dragon inheritance." The prince seemed to have no idea what the emperor was talking about. Then he turned around and got ready to leave. "As you wish. It's your business. Greetings from Scripps." But Portro stood before him. He dropped to one knee, saying, "Forgive me, your majesty. I admit that I am guilty before you." The knights could not understand why the prince was lowering his dignity in this way. The commander was perplexed as to how it was possible to believe so easily, and what if it was an impostor. But the prince was observant and pointed them to the emperor's sword. Of course, the knight recognized the Sword of Light, so the prince had no doubts, because before him was the chosen one of the God of Light. "No need for formalities," said Excel, for which the young man thanked him. His Majesty's offer to be cured of dragon blood was of interest to him. The fact that everyone believed it so easily surprised the emperor. Smiling at the pleasant words, he called the prince with him, but before returning to Runa, he had to finish his business here. Servants in white robes came out of the temple, and the same girl who helped Excel was hiding behind one of them. Seeing them, he said menacingly, "I order Saint Liena to appear before me immediately. You will not escape responsibility." This frightened the girl very much. Trembling, she recalled how he turned into a beast and tried to understand what had happened. The disciples were surprised that the emperor knew about Liena, since she had become a saint only a couple of days ago. But he was not going to explain anything, and grabbing the sword, he demanded that the girl be given back. The high priest tried to find out what he wanted from the saint, but the ruthless emperor said that he intended to execute her. And in response to the question for what, he said, "For an attempt on the life of the emperor." But the priest shouted that this was impossible. The sword whistled, cutting through the air. An enraged Excel held a sword to the man's throat, threatening to kill him if Liena did not appear. She was in a panic, but there was no other choice. Stepping forward, she prayed for the emperor to put away the sword, but he only called her to silence. Excel wanted to inflict on her the same pain that was tearing him apart. Ban cried, remembering how much pain he was in, and the emperor only ordered that the girl would speak only with his permission. The frightened priest begged to spare the saint. Surprisingly, the man agreed, saying that he would have to do something, and he asked about the town of Pretio. The monk remembered that it was a small mining town north of Lowenheim. Lowering his blade, Excel demanded that the boy Carls be found there and made a novice. The question of why only angered the emperor. He was going to count to 5 so that the priest would make a decision, and he quickly agreed. The man assigned Prince Portro to guard Liena. When they were about to leave, the girl wanted to say something about the battle. Of course, Excel couldn't allow this, and she, frightened, obediently fell silent. But the saint only tried to warn that one demon had managed to escape. Flying in the sky, the demon used disguise, turning into a human. But it took a lot of strength and his wings disappeared. He landed in some city on a small street. His trembling body didn't obey, but somehow he got up. There were knights around. They were looking for the demon that attacked the temple. He recalled with horror how he had seen the call of the Prince of Gluttony. With the help of what had entered the man, the demon was able to leave. He didn't understand why the knights were still alive. In his memories, there was only one person who could defeat the prince. The demon shook his head. This was impossible unless there was a mistake in the summoning, or the offering was meager. Walking down the narrow alley, he hoped to find a new person to inhabit, since his body was on the verge of death. The demon planned to hide in the mining settlement and then return to his continent. Then a boy ran out from around the corner. The monster didn't have time to stop. He shouted, "Get out of the way!" The child didn't have time to break. He only cried out in surprise. And they collided, falling on the road. The demon was surprised at the strength of this child. Covering his eyes from the pain, the boy looked at the man he had hit and said, "This is my bypass route. How do you know it? Are you a local?" Of course, the demon couldn't answer the truth. He wanted to ask the boy something. "I'm Carl," the child interrupted. Such a sharp transition surprised the monster very much, but the boy continued to talk about himself, that he lives in a mountain village near the mines. Then the man decided to find out how old the boy was, and he calmly admitted that he was 13. Showing with his palms how narrow the street was, he asked to let him through. The demon seemed about to give way when the child asked his name. He also called himself Carls, which surprised the child greatly. and the demon showed his true face, licking his huge fangs. From now on, he said, this is his name. At the royal castle of Runa, the priest appeared before his majesty with a report that they had not found the white-haired boy, and in the village they were saying that he had disappeared. The emperor sat majestically on the throne. He was not too pleased with this news. Frustrated, Ban thought that he should have looked for Carl's earlier. Then Excel suggested looking for him in the abandoned mines where he likes to play. However, the priest replied that they were also looking there, and begged them to give him a little more time to save the saint. The man scratched his ear and was not at all worried, because he was going to postpone the execution of the saint for a while. The priest even rose from surprise, not believing in the emperor's mercy. And then he bowed again with mad gratitude to Excel. But he still had an order for the priest to find Gorda, the son of the Launheim blacksmith. The monk stood up and tried to understand why this boy was needed. The emperor was going to train him for the Order of the White Dragon. The man also ordered to prepare a place for the portals. Before leaving, the monk wanted to talk to Liena, but the emperor said that she was in prison and he would pass on his words. At night, it was hot in the dungeon, like in a bathhouse. Excel went deeper and deeper down. Ban had no desire to go to this steam room. He stopped near the cage with the saint. She seemed to be dozing, but when she heard footsteps, she instantly woke up. Jumping to her feet, the girl greeted the emperor, who wanted to ask a question. He asked, "Why did you give me the Sword of Light?" She should have known he wasn't a Knight of Light, so why did she do that? Liena apologized and swore on her honor that she had no choice. She had a vision, she said, which greatly interested Excel. A few days before their meeting, the girl saw a child, the future Great Knight of Light. However, then everything plunged into darkness, and she saw that his destiny had changed, and the Chosen One no longer belonged to this world. In a panic, Ban thought that Carl's had died, but the saint only knew that the Chosen One, who should be pure in soul, had lost this purity. Someone had led him astray, the emperor realized with horror. His future was not in the world of people, but in the world of darkness, Liena said. Ban couldn't even imagine what had happened to Carl's. But the man was still surprised why she decided that he was the next candidate, and the girl told him about a new vision where His Majesty was fighting demons. Liena felt that the Emperor's compatibility with the ball was weak, but it was there, so she had no choice but to give up the sword. This made Excel mad. She almost killed him because she thought he was compatible. The girl, trembling in fear, begged not to be executed, but the man pulled out his sword. Falling to her knees, she begged for mercy and called upon the gods to witness that she did not want to kill him. The air was cut by the swing of a sword, but it was not Liena's body that was cut, but the lock of the dungeon. She looked at him in confusion and couldn't believe that she had been given a chance. Putting away the blade, the Emperor walked towards the exit. He admitted that in the realities of the coming war, he could not waste his talents. The girl, who didn't expect such praise, walked behind her. Excel was going to use her abilities. Feeling insecure, she said that she was completely inexperienced in magic, and yet she was going to serve the Empire without question. The thoughtful Emperor only said that he would discuss with the knights how she could help, and Liena was already happily spinning around him, trying to prove her usefulness. The man walked slowly up the stairs, but his thoughts were overwhelming him. He must find Carl's as soon as possible. After some time, the Emperor and Princess Scripps were sitting in a large room on soft sofas, and the saint sat on the floor. Looking at her, the Emperor was surprised why she did not rise from her knees. She explained that she was a sinner and did not dare to sit next to him. But Excel convinced her not to embarrass herself and sit on the sofa, or at least take a chair since she wants it so much. She stood up and walked on shaking legs to get the chair. Smiling, the man introduced her. "This is the saint from the Temple of Light, now a citizen of the Empire." The unsmiling princess said that her elder brothers had mentioned her in letters, and she had heard about her great talent in white magic. Surely the Emperor remembered how she had strengthened him with magic and helped him defeat the demon. Scripps was concerned that, unlike the saint, she was of little use in His Majesty's affairs. But Excel reassured her, telling her to focus on her studies and asking how training was going. The princess immediately cheered up, blushed, and said that Sir Ingress was very kind and often gave compliments. The Emperor immediately asked what kind of compliments he gave. "He's sure I won't lose my cool during a battle," the girl admitted. But Excel wasn't pleased. He only said that she was probably delighted by these compliments, to which Scripps replied that for the first time, someone spoke to her with kindness. Ban thought angrily about what Sir Ingress was doing instead of teaching. But the girl exclaimed that she was training with all her might, and the man remembered that this was indeed so, Ingress reported to him. He beamed with happiness as he told how masterfully the princess controlled the aura of blood, although she had not even been trained in this. That during the mock battle, He felt like it was a real battle. She, like His Majesty, also uses the power of dragon blood. The Emperor decided to check whether Scripps had actually used the power of dragon blood in her training, and she admitted it. She also admitted that even with this power, she was far behind the White Dragon Knight. Then, Excel asked if she was losing control, but the girl said that she had learned a method to partially awaken the power. This impressed the man, who himself was having a hard time maintaining control thanks to the elixir. Here, the sword of light standing next to the sofa began to shake and fall. In an instant, Liana rushed towards him. She grabbed it and handed it to the Emperor, who said, "And you are always on guard of the sword, I see. Just don't throw it next time." Liana noted that protecting the sword was the meaning of her life. Pulling out the blade, he looked at his reflection, activating the scanning ability. In addition to the usual inscriptions about his powers, a new incomprehensible line appeared, which he saw in the Prince of Gluttony, Transcendence. There was a weird hyphen at the end that Ban decided to push. Additional information revealed: Transcendence attribute characteristic, Chaos, rank 7%, skills, space distortion, gluttony. While reading, Ban tried to understand what it was. The system itself gave a hint. Transcendence is a unique skill that violates all the laws of the universe. The man, surprised, exclaimed out loud questioningly, which shocked the girl sitting next to him. He explained that someone had spoken to him. Liana remembered that there were legends that the Sword of Light spoke to its owner, and other people could not hear it. Having demanded silence, the Emperor concentrated, closing his eyes. "Can you hear me?" he asked, and immediately received the answer, "Yes, I am connected to your consciousness." Ban immediately thought that the sword could read minds, and he confirmed it. Many images of what had happened appeared before the man. The sword showed his past. Such power amazed Ban. He decided to check if the sword really showed everything. He then showed how the man dropped it, laughing. Ban apologized. He became interested in finding out why Transcendence appeared. Many images flashed around Ban. Sword replied that according to the data, it appeared because he managed to defeat a creature with such an ability. What does it give, Ban wondered, but what he was told was, the effectiveness of these abilities will depend on their level. But he was still curious about what their effects were. They answered him in the same detail. Space distortion moves objects in space and can be used as a shockwave. The man remembered that the Prince of Gluttony did this. This kind of use of space distortion is only possible after reaching a certain level, the sword admitted. But Ban was unclear how he could use the ability then. In response, he heard, "You can try it right now. Stretch out your hand and imagine that you are distorting space." The man immediately followed the advice, stretching out his hand. The space in reality seemed to spin and crumple. Scripps jumped up in horror, screaming to His Majesty. The saint also froze, realizing that space was being distorted. Excel calmed them down by waving his finger. "Nothing special," he said, stretching his hand after such magic. Windows with information about Transcendence flashed around. The sword was going to notify the Emperor about the status of Transcendence, the aura of blood, and the content of the elixir. Carefully looking through the information, the Emperor thought that perhaps Carl had seen it too, and that was why his abilities had increased so much. But the sword did not understand the question. Then the Emperor remembered that he was not acquainted with Charles and knew nothing about him. The windows kept popping up. "I am an integrated system for weapons against demons. 80% of my functionality is blocked. To get access to 100%, you need to go through one more ruin," the system said. The man remembered the terrible pain he experienced during his first sanitization. Having calculated everything, he realized that since 20% was opened in the first ruins, it meant he needed to go through 4 more. Lost in thought, Excel forgot that he was still not alone in the room. The girls looked at him in surprise, not understanding who he was talking to. Feeling their gaze, the Emperor came to his senses. Scratching his head, he admitted, "I hope I don't look like a crazy person from the outside." Hearing this, Ban thought that it was only thanks to him that everyone hadn't realized that he was crazy yet. Liana decided to clarify whether he would go to the ruins alone, and the Emperor said that he was going to the ruins of the White Heliotrope. The girl wanted to help, because she knew a priest who often went there. Then the man decided to invite her with him. The princess remembered with excitement that the ruins had been under restoration for more than 3 years. The Emperor wanted to answer, but he was interrupted. An urgent message arrived. The door swung open as Excel ordered them to enter. With a bow, Prime Minister Beos apologized as he reported. But then he saw Scripps, saying that she looked much healthier. The girl smiled and thanked him. Next, his gaze fell on Liana, who was already about to introduce herself, thinking that no one knew her. Only Bios greeted her with a smile, recognizing the famous saint and introducing himself. The touched girl bowed deeply and said hello. The emperor waved his hand and asked to read the report, and the minister began to talk about the ruins that he had been ordered to check. The heliotrope ruins will become available in 4 days and are inhabited by invisible golems. And the crystal ruins have already been plundered, and it will take a month to restore them. This news shocked Liena, because she thought that the Hunters Guild rarely changed plans. Bios boasted that the Empire's influence extends across the continent, and even hunters cannot refuse them. The girl immediately wanted to know how he convinced the guilds. To this, the minister reported that he had met with the leaders and had indicated to them that they bore personal responsibility and would face the wrath of the emperor. This approach delighted the girl. She knew that His Majesty's threats worked wonders. The minister also added that he used the influence of the temple and said that the priests would refuse them services. Even Excel praised the man who tried so hard because it was not even part of his duties. The minister was flattered, although he did not like intrigue, but did everything possible for the sake of the goal. What was the purpose? The emperor was surprised, and Bios told him that it was all part of a grand plan, and now everything was clear to him. The inspired prime minister explained that such a blow to the demons would send a signal to the entire world that the Rune Empire was a stronghold in the fight against the underworld. Liena was stunned by such obvious flattery. Who knows how His Majesty would react? But the man even liked it. He noted the wisdom of the minister. Ban was also surprised that it worked. Smiling, the princess appreciated Excel's ability to appoint the right people. The men showered each other with compliments, and the saint was even a little frightened of the minister. She trembled as she remembered the angry emperor, and this man spoke to him so easily and threatened the hunters' guilds. Getting up from the sofa, Excel warned Liena that she was going with him to the ruins, which greatly excited the girl who jumped up after her. She didn't think that they would go right now. He also added that they would be accompanied by a knight, and Scripps asked if she could go with them. In response, the emperor said, "You have something to do." The girl decided that he was talking about training. However, the man was not talking about this. He was instructing her to resolve disputes with the Sapphire Empire. The princess was saddened by this. She did not really want to meet with her relatives, but she could not disobey. With a mad grin, Excel turned to Liena and threatened, "It's your turn to prove yourself. Get ready." The girl was horrified by this. At the same time, in the Demon Kingdom, which was once inhabited by people. However, after the war with the dragons, 6 demonic principalities were formed there, and everything created by people was destroyed. Since then, demons have been coming to Earth and trying to take over the world. But the Rune Empire always thwarted their plans, but the demons did not give up. They called upon the general, and he turned the demonic state into a military stronghold and began to seize lands. Before the throne of the general, who was surprised that his subject had returned alone, the shaking Diklu bowed deeply. Everyone was destroyed. You summoned the Prince of Hell, and you don't even know what happened next. The general continued to get angry, to which the demon tried to justify himself. However, this only further angered the commander-in-chief, who shouted about the destroyed core, which they had obtained with such difficulty. He even jumped up from his throne from such emotions, shouting, "There is no longer even a response from him. You know what this means." The destruction of the Prince of Hell struck Dikl. Someone broke the core of his avatar, the demon said. He explained that if the core was saved, they could summon the prince again. But now it was impossible. Dikl tried to justify himself, because the real body was still in hell. But the general was angry. How could the demon not know? Because now the prince would not be able to incarnate on Earth. His eyes flashed. He was truly angry. The Prince of Gluttony is one of the few who has a good relationship with the earthly demons. What should I tell him now? Go back to hell and ask for another core? Trembling, Dikl muttered that he wouldn't dare. "It takes 100 years to make a new core," exclaimed the general, which left his subject incredibly stunned. Approaching the trembling body, he said, "You could have collected the core and delivered its fragments. It was your duty." The demon jumped up in horror, trying to say something in his own defense. As huge fangs flashed right before his eyes, they dug right into the neck. Dikl began to deny it, saying that he was not alone. But the general drank more and more blood while clinging to him. Throwing away the demon's body, the drunk emperor said, "I adore human blood. You took the body of a man, but there is no use in your salvation." Clutching his wounded neck, Dikl reported the attack of the mad emperor. This information really infuriated the general. Grabbing the demon by the chest, he demanded to know if Exeltrion was there, but he had already passed out. Walking around the room, the demon wondered why the emperor was near the temple. Did he know their plan? Another demon entered the room and tried to calm the milord. "We cannot be sure, but we have lost a large number of scouts. A new means of information was needed," he said, and the general agreed, intending to use a spy in sapphire gold. He admitted that he had indeed rushed and lost his patience after the failure in the Bloody Forest. Irritated by these failures on behalf of the emperor, the general decided to go into battle himself, and the subject could not argue with him when suddenly groans were heard. The child's body occupied by the demon came to life. His fingers trembled slightly. Magic flared up and part of the boy's light hair turned black. The commander-in-chief grabbed him by the shirt and tried to find out where Exceltrion was. Dark stripes appeared on one side of the man's face. He opened his eye, which was glowing with a scarlet light. The ruler looked at him, stunned. The boy became his blood relative. The demon standing nearby could not believe how the werewolf became a vampire and tried to understand what happened. And the general said that the child regained control of his body and was transformed by a vampire bite. The boy was breathing heavily, holding his throat, and the demon was surprised at how the man had driven the werewolf out of his body. Then, the milord explained that his soul was crystal clear. Carl's red eyes widened as he tried to find out where he was. The general bared his teeth in a smile, and he greeted the boy, calling him brother. Looking at his changed body, the child did not understand at all how he ended up in this place. Looking at him, the demon asked if he had lost his memory. In Carl's memories, he was in Lowenheim. The general extended his hand and placed it on the boy's face. The magic penetrated his memory. The demon said, "You don't remember anything. Now you are a vampire." He asked his name, and the boy, no longer understanding anything, replied that his name was Carl's. Introducing himself to Dekel, the vampire lord said that he was now his master. The hypnotized child only asked what he should do. "You will fight and conquer with us," the monster admitted, to which Carl said, "That's interesting." Night had fallen in the forest when three people stood frozen at the entrance to the ruins. These were the majestic ruins of White Heliotrope. On the continent of Iroth, these are the very first ruins discovered by man. Many hunters have tried to explore them, but in vain, because invisible golems live there. You can't enter them in a large group, because the ruins are so deep that provisions run out towards the end. But attempts are still being made to this day, because there are many heliotropes hidden in these ruins. These stones are used to decorate weapons and armor, to make magical items. This is a rare and valuable stone. "But the most valuable thing in these ruins," Ban said with a confident look. "It's not hard for you," the emperor interrupted, which angered Ban. But the tall girl next to him replied that it was not at all difficult. Then Excel asked her, "Aren't you surprised that I use you, the Knight of the White Dragon, as a porter?" However, the girl only smiled and said that she used to be an ordinary miner, and strength is the only thing she has. Smiling, the man did not let her belittle his abilities. "You're playing poor. It's not for nothing that they called you the she-bear of the Dimble Canyon." The saint walking next to her was struck by such a nickname. She even imagined an enraged she-bear. And the emperor recalled rumors of how the girl single-handedly protected an entire village of miners. He admitted that his father loved to talk about her exploits, which surprised the girl. "I took over his attitude towards you," Excel clarified, and she lit up with such an honor. Touching the wall, the man asked Elam what she knew about these ruins. This question seemed to embarrass the girl, but she immediately smiled and said, "I know that they are called the ruins of White Heliotrope." Laughing, she simply admitted that she didn't know anything else, and the man even doubted why he had taken her. "And yet I decided to ask differently. You are a miner? Do you know the properties of heliotrope?" The girl knew that it glowed in the dark. Ban just nodded his head. "This is the key to the ruins." When suddenly he was interrupted again, Lena leaned over tiredly, asking to stop for a rest. Another interruption infuriated Ban. The man said out loud, "We were resting 3 hours ago." Holding her heart, the saint complained that most people get tired after 3 hours of walking, and that she was not a warrior at all. Looking angrily at the girl, the emperor suggested that she return to prison since she was so tired. Bowing to the angry emperor, she apologized. However, returning to the dungeon no longer seemed such a bad option to her. At least it was just hot there. Turning away, Excel said, "We'll rest when we reach the entrance to the lower floor." Although this angered Liena, she couldn't contradict the emperor. Then the man suggested that she use white magic to strengthen her powers. This opportunity surprised the girl. After all, the priestesses told her to use white magic on herself only in extreme cases. That was true. Excel knew that white magic increased its power in proportion to its original physical strength. Thus, it would be more effective to use magic on Elam. Only the Emperor was not concerned with moral dilemmas, and he ordered Liena to take care of herself. The girl immediately began to use magic, and a golden light enveloped her. Happy that she now had strength, she rushed after her companions. After a while, they stopped to drink water. The girls carefully collected various ingredients. They went very deep. The torch barely dispersed the darkness. A strange gate with a human face appeared in front of them, and it was immediately clear that this was the entrance to the lower floor. Looking around, Elam remembered how many hunters turned back. With fear, they read their messages left on the walls. Only death lies ahead. Moderate your greed. Invisible golems are invincible. Here, I lost all my friends. Standing in front of the door, the Emperor gave his final orders. Liena, stay close to us. No matter what happens, Elam, leave everything and take only a bag of white heliotrope. Opening the gate, the man entered first. It was very dark inside and there was no way to light a torch, as this would attract all the golems. Elan stepped forward, scattering heliotrope powder, which helped to clear the darkness a little. As Ban explained his plan, he felt like a teacher to ungrateful children. Suddenly, footsteps were heard nearby. This made the girls and the Emperor wary. Excel grabbed the bag of crushed heliotrope from the girl. He threw the crumbs sharply into the air, and then something began to appear before their eyes. It was camouflaged with the help of light magic. Without a second thought, Elam jumped on the golem floating in the air and grabbed its leg. But the enemy extended his hand forward, on which a dangerous light began to glow. The girl's companions cried out in warning, and a beam burst from the golem's hand. It was aimed directly at Elam. The blow sent smoke into the air, and the Emperor and the Saint could not see if the girl was okay. There was a gaping crater on the ground next to Elam. It seems she barely dodged it. The golem's hand was charging magic again, and he was about to shoot. The girls were about to use the powder, but the Emperor remained silent, looking at the enemy. Pushing off, he jumped towards the ceiling of the cave. With a swing of the ball, cutting off a huge piece of heliotrope. Right there, before the stone fell, Excel applied distortion to it. Under the influence of magic, the crystal began to crack, disintegrating into small pieces. Dust enveloped the golem and the team saw it. The Emperor easily jumped along the walls heading towards the enemy, but he was already prepared to attack. The shot hit the man directly, and the girls screamed with concern. But Excel was also strong. He broke the beam with his sword, and he cut the golem in half. So he broke through without difficulty. When the Emperor landed, fragments of the golem and heliotrope flew from above. Worried about his majesty, the girls were already running to him. Having calmed them down, Excel said that he was safe. The moon shone above the castle in the demon world. There was a boy standing by a huge mirror with gargoyles. He looked at his changed body in panic. Until now, the boy could not understand what was happening, how the monster did not eat him. The memory of it gave him goosebumps. Calming down, Carls tried to remember what happened next, but he only remembered how he woke up and turned into a vampire. His heart no longer beat. The eyes became red with a vertical pupil. It seems like all the strength has left the body. Carls walked in circles near the mirror, thinking that this was all definitely because of Diclarin. Until now, his influence has been very strongly felt. The boy walked up to the torch, bending his face over it. Flames engulfed his body. Carls was not going to blindly obey the demon in everything. It seemed that the vampire's words had no effect on the boy. He laughed happily, realizing that the demon had easily told him everything, believing that he could control him. Remembering the situation where everyone on the way bowed to Diclarin, one could guess that he was the leader of the demons. The strongest demons did not dare raise their heads when they saw him. He crouched down, anticipating how difficult it would be to escape. Carls thought sadly that he should not have gone to Lowenheim to explore the mine. But then he remembered why he did it at all. It was as if someone was calling him from there. In his loneliness, it seemed to him as if the gargoyle on the mirror had spoken to him. The boy even shouted at her, trying to figure out what to do if his pretense was discovered. Having threatened the statue, he decided to speak about himself for safety, and the statue seemed to be asking if he could leave. But Carls couldn't, because he didn't even know where he was. And even if Diclas escaped, he could track representatives of his race, so he would find him immediately. Besides, the vampire is incredibly strong, and someone stronger was needed for protection. Carls knew that in order to be freed, he had to find such a person. At this time, crystal fragments continued to flash under the vaults of the cave. Elam was surprised that there was a flying golem here. The Emperor sat on the ground looking at the remains of the monster. He also did not know that it would fly. He had encountered a golem before in other ruins, but this one wasn't a guardian. The man did not go into more detail about this, but only ordered them to leave before the other golems arrived. On the way, they met another monster, but managed to hide from it. Then they came across a fork in the road and had to choose the darkest road. Finally, they came to a huge room with columns. Everything around was shining, and in the center there was a pedestal. As they walked forward, they realized that this seemed to be the end of the dungeon. When Elam took another step, a strange sound was heard. Everything around shook and the sound grew louder. A column of light shot from the pedestal into the sky. In the center, it was as if something was opening up. Out of nowhere, a translucent door appeared in the midst of this light. An excited Elam stepped forward, covering the Emperor, while Liena trembled and asked what it was. Only Excel walked around her, advising her to move away. Drawing his sword, he stood before the huge, translucent golem that had appeared, intending to deal with it himself. Pointing a sword at him, the man asked who he was. The monster introduced itself as the Guardian, Seda 0317. Now that it became clear that the girls were not in any danger, they came closer. Liena touched the golem with surprise and did not feel the body. "I have not stopped moving and switching off to help you, my descendants," the creature said. But the Emperor hurried him, because he had already heard it. The golem immediately warned that he would soon stop moving. This puzzled the Emperor, because this had not happened last time. And the keeper continued to say, "Originally, my functions were supposed to cease after 2 years. But due to the golems, the system experienced an error and connected to the main system to block the complete shutdown." Excel was surprised. He only said that he would turn off. The golem was confused. He tried to justify himself, but the impatient Emperor only urged him to say whether he would turn off or not. Excel's persistence delighted Liena so much that she even sparkled. Finally, the keeper got to the main point, claiming that he could also perform the duties of a guide. The man chuckled and was glad that he could show them the secret areas. And he started throwing questions at me. "Where are the keys? Is it really in my eye again? What is the problem with work? Because that's how it was." Then a light came on in his eye. It completely surrounded the Emperor, and he even had to cover his eyes from its brightness. By analyzing, the golem learned everything about Excel, his race, his strength, and the fact that he had already drunk the elixir. Knowing that the elixir had already been used, he told about the deepest place of the dungeon, where the sleeping talisman left by ancient people was located. And he continued, "We need to go past the anus and find the talisman and destroy the bomb." Having said this, the robot disappeared. Only the red ball, which was the key, rolled on the ground. Not understanding anything, Elam just scratched her head, but the Emperor himself certainly didn't know anything. He just squatted down to pick up the ball. "It seems there is some kind of system left behind by ancient people," he explained, holding up the key. He also added, "These are some kind of artifacts." All this information amazed Liena, even though she said that she knew everything about this dungeon. She heard this for the first time. Then they came to a new door, on which a human face was also carved. There were many heliotrope stones inserted around it. There was no description of this place in the book, so Ban himself did not expect it to be so creepy. The door seemed to be painted with blood. Then, Excel ordered to lean on the door to open it. The girls strained with all their strength and pushed the door, and the Emperor only directed them. When the gates finally opened, a bright light poured out. Trying to see what was inside, the girls squinted. Another room appeared in front of them, with a face carved into the wall. The travelers dispersed in different directions, looking around. Suddenly, there was a ringing sound. The girls jumped in surprise. A window popped up at the top, in which the system greeted her. Elam pointed at it with her finger, thinking that it was an artifact. The system even stuttered at such an assumption, and an irritated Excel gave the girl a slap on the back of the head, calling for silence. Everyone immediately fell silent, looking at the stone face from where the information came. Then the system explained that the emerald artifact transmitted the data to her, and she knew about the elixir. The Emperor did not expect that they could exchange information, but the system confirmed that this was the case. They had a master system for all the data. After the man asked where the talisman was, the face's mouth opened, revealing a stone in it. Reflections of flame sparkled on its bright red edges. "This is medicine," Excel asked, to which he was told, "That's right, the talisman is capable of granting high-level magic that does not interfere with the power of blood. Even if you control the power of blood, you will be able to use it." The Emperor could not believe such abilities. Banu knew the main rule of this world was the impossibility of using magic and the power of blood. It is rare to find a person with both powers, but if they are activated at the same time, it will cause a strong side effect. Taking the talisman, the Emperor realized that only it would allow him to use 2 powers at the same time. Still worried, Excel asked again if he could really use magic, but the system confirmed that it was correct. When he was about to swallow the stone, Elam stopped him. She was uneasy about believing the artifact's words. But the man ate the stone, telling her not to worry. Then he swallowed hard, and I asked the system when I could use magic, and it replied, "The effect will appear in about 3 hours." The system was about to shut down, having completed its last mission, but the Emperor wanted to ask one more question. Were the ancient people also destroyed by demons? He asked. Shaking his head, Ban didn't understand why he was asking if he wouldn't get an answer anyway. However, the system began to talk about the reasons for the destruction of ancient people, which incredibly stunned him. Definitely one of the reasons was the demons, the system said, touching the statue. Excel was surprised that those who had unrivaled skills were destroyed, but the system could not give a clear answer, and suggested listening to the system of the next artifact. An angry Ban cursed the system. He knew he wouldn't hear the whole truth. Turning to the girls, the Emperor ordered them to look for a hole for the key. They were looking closely at the floor and walls when Liana looked up. There was a small dark hole gaping in the ceiling. The girl pointed at it, shouting that she had found a hole. Excel threw the key to Ellum with the order to insert it into the hole. She caught it and was about to follow the Emperor's order. She pushed off sharply and jumped. The girl aimed straight at the hole in the ceiling, and the ball fit perfectly there. A red light began to emanate from it. The light grew stronger and everything around shook. Stones fell from the ceiling. Using light magic, Liana covered them with a protective dome. Ellum exclaimed, "We must leave as soon as possible." Suddenly, the floor right in the middle began to separate. The Emperor shouted for no one to move. The floor parted in different directions and they found themselves in the air. The girls screamed in fear, and everyone flew down somewhere. They fell quite long and deep. Having landed in another cave, the girls fell down somehow, and only Excel remained on his feet. Ellum hit her head, and Liana cried with her eyes closed when the Emperor told her to stop, because they had already landed. But the girl still could not calm down, remembering how quickly everything happened. Then the man ordered to look for a secret place, and Ellum extended her hand to the saint for help. As they began to explore the cave, Ellum noticed something. In the very center, in the wall, slightly higher than human height, a strange stone glowed red. He was so attention-grabbing, beckoning. Trying to understand what it was, the girl touched it. The stone lit up, and there was a crackling sound. The wall rose up with a roar. It seems that it was here that she shouted. The smiling Emperor praised her. "It's not for nothing that you are a member of the Order of the White Dragon." Liana even envied that she had not found the entrance first, and the travelers went further, climbing the stairs. The Emperor, walking ahead, froze. They seemed to have arrived at the same place they left, with the same stony face. They all stopped in shock looking at the statue. The saint was so fed up with this statue that she approached it waving her fist. She slapped his face, swore that she almost died, and asked what he had planned. But suddenly the statue shook slightly, and her eyes glowed red. This really scared Liana. She thought that she had angered the statue and began to stutter and apologize. Opening its mouth, the statue welcomed them into the secret area. An angry Excel didn't care about the pleasantries. He wanted to know what kind of trap this was. And the statue said that it was a simple device to explain the blow. "You fell from a fair height and probably got hit," she said. But for the Emperor, the owner of the power of blood, this was a trifling height. And pointing at Liana, who was still crying, he added that she seemed to have experienced shock. Persistently, the system continued to claim that it could grant an ability that would reduce any hit to 0. Noticing that the statue was sweating, Ellum, who looked like a huge bear, glared at it, threatening to break it. Already frightened, Liana couldn't take it anymore and fell unconscious. In a panic, Ellum ran to her, trying to help but only frightened her even more. The saint completely switched off, and the system was even glad that she managed to escape. While Ellum was anxiously trying to bring Liana to her senses, the Emperor was wondering if maybe this time he would get physical abilities. The man decided to approach the statue, and she told him that the skill was called Psycho Barrier. "It allows you to set up a force field that absorbs and softens the impact," the system explained. This did not look like blood or magic, the Emperor realized, and asked how it worked. Then the statue began to tell, "The Psycho Barrier has the same structure as the scan. It is imprinted in the brain and activates the connection with the system." Excel still remembered that crazy pain, but he still wanted to try. Ban was shaking in fear. His head was also hurting, so why do they decide everything alone? Finally, the system asked, "Do you want to acquire this skill?" And the Emperor agreed. After confirmation, Ban was truly horrified. The system became so serious, he probably knows how painful it is. Then the statue said that the skill transfer process would begin in 10 seconds, and after completion it would transfer them upstairs. Excel asked to take care of the girls, who did not hear anything at all. Lena was unconscious, and Elam was trying to wake her up. The system agreed and began the process, light pouring from its eyes. The beam hit the Emperor straight in the forehead, who gritted his teeth in pain. His brain seemed to catch fire. Ban clutched his head and screamed. Hearing this, the girls rushed to His Majesty, trying to understand what was happening, but the system was not going to explain since it was not being listened to. A red light swirled around them. Magic flared, turning everything white. Ban felt like a volcano was erupting in his head. His brain was melting and becoming liquid like lava. But then sounds were heard around. Someone was calling His Majesty, and the Emperor opened his eyes. Half asleep, it seemed to him that a huge bear was asking if he was okay. In a panic, he began to drive it away, but then his vision cleared, and he saw Elam. The saint next to him even laughed, realizing that the man was also afraid of her. After looking around, he asked where they were, and the girl replied that they were at the entrance to the dungeon. While the Emperor was unconscious on the street, it was already deep night. Standing up, the Emperor said that they needed to get back to the Empire as quickly as possible. He angrily threatened Lena. "If you laugh again, I'll send you to prison." But she only continued to smile. Suddenly, Elam noticed that there was something wrong with the Sword of Light. It seemed to be glowing. And then a voice spoke in Excel's head. "You were unconscious. In order to heal the consequences, a large amount of elixir was used. Currently, the filling rate of the elixir is 14%. It is restored by 25% daily." The man grabbed his head from such a flow of information and asked the system to speak more slowly, because he was not going to fight now. To which the system replied that it would look at the subsequent danger. When the Emperor agreed to this, she began to literally squeeze out the words. The dissatisfied man immediately hurried her, and the girls standing nearby were surprised by his shout. Lena even thought that he was out of his mind. During the skill transfer process, you acquired an additional part of the neural network. If you wish, I can synchronize it, the system said. Of course, Excel wanted to use up to 40% of his abilities and ordered to start synchronization. It was as if something was beginning to change in his brain. The system was gradually establishing a connection. When everything was over, the Emperor exhaled heavily. Ban also sighed, glad that everything was finally over. He looked at his palms in surprise, feeling as if something had become different. The girls even became worried that something was hurting him. He spent so long looking at his hands. But Excel admitted that nothing hurt. Elam looked at him and exclaimed, "Your Majesty, your eyes are shining." This had happened before, the Emperor remembered, and said that it would soon pass. Then the system said, "Connection complete. Testing is being activated. Raise your right hand." The Emperor obeyed and raised his hand. Immediately, a blue glowing barrier surrounded the palm. He looked like pieces of a polygon, the man realized. Lena was surprised when she heard him. She didn't even know what a polygon was, but he ordered her not to think about it. Excel thought that this was the psychological barrier, and the system confirmed that everything was correct. She also added, "This skill can be transferred to any part of the body, but its use may be limited in a confined space surrounded by metal or underground." Looking at the sword, the Emperor thought about using the skill without it. The blade shook all over and stuttered that the transfer was possible. Then there was no need to protect it with a barrier, the man decided, to which the sword lit up, trying to prove its usefulness. He even shouted, "With my help, you can reduce your blood consumption." Axel had to cover his ears from the volume, and Ban just shrugged his shoulders and thought that the sword's irritation looked suspicious. The Emperor spread his hands with a grin, but the blade continued to shake, expressing his indignation. Lena was no longer frightened by such a smile. She only thought that His Majesty was intimidating someone again. Suddenly, Elam remembered that Sir Duran had asked her to pass on something when they got outside. Very excited about the event that was about to take place, he asked to bring Excel to the Empire immediately after leaving the dungeon. Ban immediately guessed that he was talking about the Zhelong Festival. Facts about it floated into his head. It is the biggest holiday in the Empire. It is held annually. However, the Emperor interrupted him, saying that there was nothing special about him. This attitude towards his efforts and ignoring him angered Ban, but Excel was already getting ready to return to the Empire. When the travelers approached the teleportation gate, the man even thought that someone sighed with joy that they didn't have to listen to his tirade. And then the light of the teleporter flashed in the Imperial Palace. They finally returned home. The next moment, Sir Duran ran out to the Emperor in a panic because the Zhelong Festival was tomorrow. Excel was surprised at how long they had waited for him, but the minister was truly worried that His Majesty would not make it in time. The man waved it off and was about to go eat and rest. He praised the happy girls and ordered them to rest too. Duran turned to Elam. I told you to bring him as quickly as possible. To which the girl only apologized, saying, "We're not late." Approaching the stairs, the emperor was about to go up to his chambers. Only the minister did not leave him alone, telling him about the festival and that the ministers were not happy with his long absence. The tired man was irritated by all this chatter. What difference does it make to them? Lately, all they've done is drink. It's better to go out somewhere than sit here, said Excel. Sir Duran responded by explaining that the situation was different now, and he asked to think about his health and state affairs. Raising his head, the minister realized that His Majesty was no longer nearby. The emperor had almost reached the end of the stairs, leaving Duran behind. He rushed after him, shouting, "You heard what I said!" Stopping, Excel turned around and said the man's name, causing him to freeze abruptly. Looking menacingly at the minister, he said, "I have entrusted state affairs to the chancellor. Do you think I can handle politics better than Bios?" "Of course not," Duran replied, instantly becoming serious. This answer upset Ban a little. The minister admitted that the new chancellor was doing a good job, which pleased the emperor, and he said that Bios should then engage in politics. However, Duran added that there were many dissatisfied ministers on this matter, but Excel only chuckled at the suggestion to adapt to the ministers. Walking behind the emperor, the minister suggested treating his subordinates without singling anyone out, to which the man said, "I don't single anyone out, they just feel superior." The minister also asked to pay more attention to the events of the palace, and Excel promised to come to the festival, but Ban did not like at all that Duran followed him. And then the minister remembered last year's Zhelong festival, when the emperor got drunk and was dragged by the elders. But Excel just waved it off and said that he didn't remember anything. But Ban now understood Duran and why he was following him. Sighing, the minister hoped that everything would go smoothly this year, and Ban said to trust him. In Excel's memories, the Zhelong festival was the last place he visited with the previous emperor. They were then standing near the dragon statue and talking. Excel looked at his father, who was saying something. He remembered well his voice at the end when he said, "Holding the ceremony at the festival is the emperor's duty. It must be held every year." Approaching the door to his chambers, the emperor froze. He asked Duran to organize tomorrow's ceremony, and the minister, of course, was going to do it. Entering the room, the man said that he was going to rest and sent the official to rest as well, and the door finally closed. But the emperor did not sit still and opened the secret door. As he ran down the corridor, he thought that he couldn't miss this day. His target was Princess Scrip's chambers. He then gave instructions to the maid to call Elam and Leona. At this time, Duran was walking to his room, confident that everything would go smoothly this time. A chandelier was burning brightly in the large room. The girls and the emperor gathered at a huge table with treats and wine. They laughed and drank. Ban really wanted to celebrate the end of this day. When Duran decided to check what was going on, he stood in shock on the threshold, watching as Excel got drunker and drunker. He felt like a complete fool for believing the emperor. Joyful cries were heard throughout the palace all night long, and only towards morning everything became quiet. On unsteady legs, in a terrible state, the emperor left the room. With a feeling of nausea, a disheveled Ban realized that he had drunk too much. Looking around, he wondered if there was anything here to cure a hangover. And then a dish with a shining, golden liquid appeared in front of him. She was so beautiful that Ban wondered if it was magic, but it was Sir Duran who brought honey water with herbs. The angry minister asked how much the emperor had drunk yesterday, and he grabbed the cup with the drink, trying to remember. While Excel was drinking honey water, Duran was still trying to understand whether the emperor hadn't said yesterday that he wanted to rest, since the situation last year was no better. Having thrown the cup to the minister, the emperor ordered that preparations be started right away in order to be in time. In the chambers, the man began to put on his clothes. When the servants knocked on the door, he let them in. The maids helped Excel put on a long red robe. He adjusted the sword of light on his belt. When the emperor was finally ready, he and Sir Duran went down to the teleportation room, and we went to the festival site. The founder of the Rune Empire was Emperor Zikarin. He was half-dragon, with human and dragon blood mixed in his veins, and also a hero of the war with dragons, after which the entire continent was destroyed. This war began because of the appearance of the mad dragon Yognite, and even those dragons who lived in peace with people went mad and destroyed everything around them. Cities were destroyed and many people died. The one who saved the continent from this nightmare was Zikarin. After the end of the war, the people called him a hero. He united the destroyed lands into one state and took the place of emperor. This is how the Rune Empire was formed. This is the truth that the world knows, but Ban knew that there was probably still some life left in the corpse of the dead Yognite. His body is kept secret from everyone, in the dungeon of Kranmar, the capital of the Rune Empire. Accompanied by the intern, the emperor and the prime minister were just heading there. Excel froze and thought that he hadn't been here for a long time. Before him loomed a tall castle, the palace of the Red Dragon, the Tower of Zakharin. It was built so high to show everyone the grandeur of the Rune Empire, but in reality, it was to distract attention from the dungeon where the body was hidden. The guard at the gate bowed and greeted His Majesty. "Long time no see, Rubens," Excel greeted, and the knight asked how he had been. The emperor tried to remember if they had seen each other last year, and Duran replied with resentment, "That's because you got very drunk last year." Clearing his throat in embarrassment, Excel praised Rubens, to which he bowed gratefully and replied, "As the senior guard, I will guard this place so that nothing happens during the festival." Looking at the knee of the aged knight, Ban understood that this was the type of worker who did not allow personal emotions to show. He did not really like them. But Rubens was not one to be ignored. The position of chief of the guard in the Red Dragon Palace is entrusted to the one who has the strongest fighting power among the knights. Even if the entire palace is on fire, Rubens will not leave his post and will stand until the end, and fight countless demons. However, even such a strong warrior was exhausted by the onslaught of demons. He died bleeding from the sword of the traitor, Varza. These memories brought sadness to the emperor. Duran, who was standing nearby, advised Excel to go back inside, but the emperor wanted to say something to the chief of the guard. He asked the knight to stand up and was going to talk to him on the way. Rubens raised his head in surprise, because he had to guard the entrance. But pointing his finger at the guards who had come with him, the emperor said, "Today they will guard the entrance." Turning to the knights, the man asked if they considered this an impossible task. But the guards were going to sacrifice their lives and protect this place. "Get up quickly, Rubens, unless you doubt their abilities," the emperor ordered, and the knight immediately stood up. And he followed Excel and the minister to the palace. As he walked down the stairs, the emperor lamented that keeping Rubens in such a place was a great loss for the empire. The guard responded by trying to prove how honorable it was to guard the palace. But Excel puzzled him. "Do you really think that standing here is an honor? Don't you want to fight demons? Don't you want the whole world to know your name?" Hearing these words, the knight fell silent. Duran, who was walking behind them, was becoming increasingly worried that they might not make it to the ceremony. After thinking it over, Rubens raised his serious gaze and replied, "As you said, I would like to leave this place and fight the demons." Knowing that this would be the case, the emperor calmed the knight and said that the palace would be guarded by elves and people from the Temple of Light. Duran became increasingly angry, not intending to leave the emperor's actions unpunished. And so they came to their goal. Looking at the huge skeleton of the dragon, Excel always gave him a strange feeling. A shocked Rubens approached the skeleton, the white dragon Yogg-Knight. He couldn't believe that this was the same Yogg-Knight. Approaching the skull, the emperor asked, "You have guarded the castle for so many years, but this is the first time you see it?" The knight admitted that he was indeed here for the first time, and was very impressed by the preservation of the bones. Touching the skeleton, Excel calmed the man and said that he was indeed dead. The emperor stroked the huge skull and admitted, "Its magical power is still present here." The dragon was truly gigantic. The skull and horns alone were striking to the imagination. Even the claws on his wing were preserved. "That's why we were able to preserve the skeleton in such a state," Excel finished. Duran also added that demons are hunting for his remains. That's why the empire keeps a close eye on them. It was time to begin the ceremony. The minister approached the emperor holding something in his hands. Excel was going to finish everything as quickly as possible. Duran found himself holding a shining dagger in his hands. The emperor decided to take him. The ceremony itself was very simple. With the help of a dagger, it was necessary to cut the skin, and then spill the blood from the wound onto Yogg-Knight's skull. To some extent, the ceremony was a formality. But the shedding of strong dragon blood during the repeated ritual prevented the awakening of the dragon spirit. Examining the dragon's skeleton, Duran reported that everything had worked out, and the signs of Yogg-Knight's soul activity had disappeared. He handed Excel a towel and admired the effect of his blood. Wiping his hands, the emperor turned to Rubens. "Well, what do you think? This is the ceremony of the Zhelong festival." The knight bowed and replied, "It is a great honor for me to be present at such an important event. I will remember this all my life." And then he decided to find out why they showed him such mercy. With a grin, Excel replied, "Because you are a strong warrior." This assessment delighted Rubens. He couldn't even believe it. But the emperor, throwing the dagger to the minister, only confirmed that strong warriors deserved appropriate treatment. He was already heading towards the exit and talking about the upcoming battle on the battlefield. The delighted knight pressed his hand to his heart, and kneeling down he said, Whatever enemy dares to become an obstacle in your path, I will do everything possible to clear the path from this enemy." At this, Excel smiled and said that he was looking forward to it. Having finally finished all the business in the basement, they headed for the exit. The sun was shining brightly outside. As soon as His Majesty left the castle, Renard was already running towards him. The girl stopped in front of him, breathing heavily. The Emperor did not expect to meet her here. "What happened?" he asked. Renard handed him a letter with urgent news from the Chancellor. Taking the scroll, Excel unrolled it, not knowing what to expect. It read, "Your Majesty, today at dawn news came from the Wailing Wall. Demons began to riot outside the fortress. I sent part of the Black Dragon Order there. I report on the actions taken so as not to interfere with the holiday. After lunch, I will personally come to the palace and report in more detail." For Ban, there was nothing urgent here. He knew about demons before. But as he read on, he became worried. There was also news from Sapphire Gold. A few days ago, Princess Scripps visited the kingdom and conveyed the fact that the Rune Empire is guarding the princes to reduce the dragon blood levels. However, King Magus put Scripps in prison along with the entire delegation, and it is also unknown whether the knights who went with her are alive. After the ceremony, please pay a visit to the Chancellor. After reading the letter, Ban was shocked and angry. Out of anger, he tore it apart. Both Ban and Excel were equally angry. While the Emperor was tearing up the letter, the minister tried to calm him down. Frightened by the Emperor's anger, Renard reported that the ministers were expecting his visit. Raising her head, she thought, "The Emperor will go there first." However, his eyes were burning madly with anger. "I'll go to the Chancellor a little later," he asked to be told, and the frightened girl, of course, obeyed. And then she immediately ran to carry out the order. Excel, who was shaking with anger, called Rubens, ordering him to gather all members of the White Dragon Order. This order amazed the knight, but the Emperor insisted and allowed the members of the order to use the teleport inside the palace without limitation. The stunned and excited knight immediately obeyed. Clutching the scraps of the letter, the Emperor thought that he was not going to tolerate this. He let the paper fly away, thinking about Sapphire Gold and Magus, and intending to teach them good manners. It was quite dangerous in the demon world at night. In front of the huge wolf, Carl seemed very tiny. Dodging the paws with huge claws, he jumped back. Behind his back, wings flapped like a bat's. They lifted him into the air and the boy rushed forward, attacking the beast in its unprotected belly. The wolf whined in pain. But Carl's didn't stop there. He went back into battle. A magic circle glowed on his hand. Magic enveloped the huge beast. Having defeated the enemy, the boy landed. The wolf, not yet dead, trembled and bared his teeth. Raising his hands, Carl said, "Good dog, it won't hurt." He cast a spell and the reflections of magic were still reflected in the beast's eyes. The boy sat down next to him and reassured him that he would not kill. Carl stroked the stiff fur and was about to tear off a piece of flesh. Then, with a sharp wave of his hand, he tore it off, and he began to drink blood, eating the wolf's flesh. Full and satisfied, he wiped the blood from his mouth. "I think that's enough. You tried to kill me too," he said, leaning towards the wolf, and he sat down next to him, shocking the silent beast. The boy decided to speak out to the beast. Recently, Dekel has been sending his people either to the Wailing Wall or to the fortress, but it looks like they're also preparing something grand in the kingdom of Saphigold. Listening to this, the wolf only looked questioningly at Carl's. He didn't understand why he was telling all this. Then the boy began to remember how Dekel had asked him yesterday where he wanted to go this time. Carl's really wanted to go to Saphigold, but in the end he said he didn't know and pretended to be a devoted fool. However, Dekel sent him to Saphigold. This piece of luck made the boy extremely happy. Finally, he had a chance to get out of this terrible lair, but the wolf did not share his joy. He himself would have gladly run away from Carl's. Poking his finger at the wolf, the boy demanded an answer from him. But he still continued to tell why this was such a good chance, because there were many strong people in Saphigold who could protect him from Dekel. In response, the beast remained silent, only thinking about revenge when he could move. Looking into the distance, he decided that even though there was no White Dragon Squad from the Rune Empire here, but there are certainly many strong knights and magicians, you just have to ask them. In Carl's mind, he will approach the guards and try to prove that he is a human, and his knowledge of the demon army could come in handy. But the boy understood that people would hardly believe him, especially since he didn't look his best now and didn't look like a human being. Listening to him, the wolf thought that he also didn't look normal with a torn piece of flesh and the guy really was a monster. Carl's really did have many differences from a human. The skin on his face became dark on one side. Fangs appeared in my mouth and my taste for food changed. and Dekel gave strange clothes. Standing up, he cried out at the top of his voice that he was a man and not a demon, and only the wolf heard him, but he didn't care. Meanwhile, a teleporter began to shine in the palace. An irritated emperor emerged from it, immediately ordering Duran and Rubens to begin preparations. Still madly angry, he ordered Beos to report the situation. Beos said, "King Magus believes that the princes were kidnapped by the Rune Empire, so he detained our envoys." This made Excel even more excited because he cured their dragon blood. Beos also suggested that in order to return the ambassadors, the emperor must go there personally. Stamping irritably up the steps, he understood that since he had been called, he had to go. His anger was strong and he was going to show his full power to Magus. The Prime Minister was eager to tell His Majesty not to start a war. However, the Emperor exclaimed, "Sapphire Gold has already declared war," and he asked whether it would be right to avoid military action. Beos, who couldn't even think of such a thing, looked at Excel in shock. Having bowed, he was about to follow the Emperor's decision, and he wished him to return in full health. Looking at the minister, Excel ordered to deal with the demons on the Wailing Wall, although he added that it would not be necessary. Not understanding what was wrong, the minister raised his head. They met the Emperor's gaze, and Beos understood the connection between the kingdom of Sapphire Gold and the demons. While thinking, Ban felt that this was the perfect moment. Just when the demons attacked, his people were arrested. Then Renard appeared at the stairs. She bowed when she saw His Majesty. She was wearing the White Dragon's armor and happily shared that she had been transferred to the White Dragon Order. As the Emperor passed by, he advised her to concentrate as the real battle would soon begin, and Renard turned around in surprise. He told about the beginning of the war with Sapphire Gold and the entry into battle of the Order of the White Dragon. Meanwhile, night fell in Saphigold, but in the huge castle they were still not sleeping. In the dungeon, King Magus spoke to his captive. "I didn't think it would go this far, Scripps. I was going to weaken the position of the Rune Empire a little." The tied-up girl was completely exhausted. She called on His Majesty to come to his senses. But this only angered the king. For him, everything was decided as soon as Barge was executed. He stepped towards the captive, and he raised her head, not intending to tolerate his subjects being killed. Trembling, Scripps insisted that the Emperor was different and could not be defeated. These words enraged Magus, and he hit the girl in the face with all his might. She lowered her head, exhausted. Then the door opened slightly and someone entered, trying to calm the king. The man turned around, looking at the person who entered. It was General Barge who had returned. He told Magus that he had prepared everything and returned. And the king confessed, "Now I can trust only you. Your brother was mercilessly killed by the Emperor of Rune," he added, "and also how he endured all this time." A malicious smile appeared on Magus's face. This time he would not avoid war. "Thank you, His Majesty." Barge knelt down, reporting the completion of the preparation of the armed golems. Joyfully, the king ordered them to be summoned. At once, Barza clapped his hands, and somewhere on the street there was a sound of footsteps. The metal feet walked quickly with a clanking sound. Huge hordes of armor-like golems appeared before them. The emperor looked at them with admiration and could not believe that these were armed golems. He praised Barge for making such soldiers, and the general told about the research that his brother had secretly conducted before he died. It was in a forest ablaze with flames. There in the laboratory, a man was conducting experiments on people. When Burzu found him, he couldn't believe what his brother was doing. Covered in blood, with a scalpel in his hands, he said he was almost finished. Running up to his brother, Burzu tried to stop him. But his brother pushed him away, shouting, "If I don't do this, our clan won't survive." And again he returned to the body on the table. His hands were covered in blood up to his shoulders. The exchange looked at this in horror. He was overcome with anger at the thought that he had done this for his family and then been killed. "Your Majesty, I am here to avenge my brother's death," Birza admitted. He also added that he spent his entire life in seclusion, studying magic and family techniques. "If we add these warriors invented by my brother, they will definitely be able to defeat the Rune Empire." Looking at the king, he asked what his final decision was. Magus admitted that he was afraid of the Rune Empire. However, he realized his mistake, and he turned to the general. "Tune in to great deeds. This war will show which kingdom is the strongest on the continent." When the king asked how many golems he could make in a year, Barge replied that if he tried, he could make 20 golems. A happy Magus looked at the warriors, asking, "Aren't the best knights those who have A-rank blood?" And the general confirmed this. And he came closer to the captive princess, wondering how she had come to this. The girl radiated strong magic, and the bonds that bound her glowed, but did not weaken. Looking at this pitiful sight, Barge grinned. The ropes on scripts were his invention and were called the blood suppression seal. I never thought that you would come back here yourself. Thanks to you, things went like clockwork, said the general. Looking at the unconscious girl, he wondered how she managed to work on the ruler of Rune. Now he personally intends to visit the kingdom. Stroking her wounded cheek, Barge imagined that the emperor was now crossing the border and that they would soon deal with him. Turning her face, he mocked her and called her ugly. The king seemed to be completely mad trying to understand how strong the golems were, and the general replied that they were now moving thanks to his magic. Clutching Scrip's face, he promised to avenge his brother's death on her father. Suddenly the girl came to her senses, and this surprised Barge, because the dragon's blood was probably also sealed. Opening her eyes with difficulty, she tried to shout to his highness, but the man covered her mouth with his hand, telling her to wait. She closed her eyes and tried to free herself, realizing that this man could not be trusted, and Barza only grinned at these attempts. His eyes glowed with a dangerous demonic light. Then someone showed up with a report. The man made his way through the golem formation with difficulty, and bowing, he reported, "The ruler of the Rune Empire and his retinue have just crossed our border." Magus was shocked by the speed of the emperor. He didn't expect the White Dragon order to arrive so soon. Having finally released the princess, the general began to calm the king, and he advised to listen to the messenger to the end, who said that there were no White Dragon knights among the retinue. It was indeed strange that the Emperor of Rune had come to them without the order of the White Dragon, and Barge added, "Once he reaches the royal palace, everything will go according to plan." Hearing this, Scripps couldn't believe that Excel was coming after her. One look at the golems was enough to understand how dangerous it was to go here alone. Not wanting to become a burden, she bit her lip until it bled. Seeing this, the shocked speaker screamed. The king turned around and ordered something to be done. Magic erupted from Barge's outstretched hand as he ordered the binding. The ropes immediately obeyed his will, rising into the air and wrapping themselves even tighter around the princess. The girl tried to get out, but it was all in vain. Walking towards her, Magus said, "It's only because you are my daughter that I endured." And again he hit her hard in the face, realizing that the Rune Empire had won her over to its side. The girl lost consciousness from the blow, and the king turned around and shouted, "This is not the time to relax. Who knows? Perhaps among his entourage there are several knights of the White Dragon." But Barge said not to worry, because they had stationed knights with sensitive orange blood on the border, and among those who crossed the border, they had identified only one person with special powers. Turning around, he asked the border reporter for confirmation, and he said that everything was correct. Exceltrion's actions made King Magus extremely angry. He ordered the general to hurry up, and he handed over power over the entire army with the demand to capture the emperor alive. And if he starts to resist, he said to use the hostage. Only when this does not help can you kill him. These words made Barge smile, and he obeyed with pleasure. As the king walked away, the general knew that this was the end of Sapphire Gold. When the king had already left, Barge turned around. He was going to take revenge on this world for his brother's death, to break free and live a new life in the world, in which neither lineage nor family will have power, he thought, looking at the princess. The Barge was going to create a new world. As the morning came, King Sapphire Gold's castle became completely different. There was a huge fountain in front of the entrance. Looking around, the emperor thought that Magus was living quite well. When he approached the castle gates, he was stopped and asked who he was. The two guards crossed their lances in unison and said, "This road leads to the royal palace. Commoners have no right to walk on it." Surprised by these words, Excel froze. He said with a grin, "You think I'm a commoner? It's true, Sapphire Gold. Even the guards dare to be insolent." The knights just looked at the emperor in shock. From his clothes, they realized that the man was an aristocrat and asked what kind of family he was from. Excel was about to answer why he came, but he was interrupted. A knight ran towards him, shouting his name. Having caught his breath, he told how he was frightened by the disappearance of His Majesty, because the time for the meeting had not yet arrived. Both the emperor and Ban hated being interrupted. The man threatened that next time he would not be merciful, and Ingress apologized. Looking at them, the two guards said as if they were reflections, "He looks like a knight, but not Sapphire Gold. Maybe a free knight?" They continued their sentences one after another, and this made Ban laugh. But he felt that this carelessness would anger readers because it was time to act. Turning around, the emperor asked Ingus where the others were, and he replied that they were waiting for the assembly in front of the gate. And then Excel realized that the knight was calling his name, although he asked not to do so. To which Ingus admitted, "From the moment I appeared here in this armor, it became impossible to hide this information. After thinking it over, the Emperor agreed. Smiling, Excel got ready to wait for the others. He was wondering when the guards would figure out who he was. However, they still insisted that he tell them his name, because in the kingdom of Saphigold, outsiders cannot pass so easily. The guards told us to go back, but then one of them seemed to understand something. They looked at the strange strangers in horror. Then their opinions diverged, each telling the other to go for help. In the end, they couldn't agree on who would go for help. The guards raised dust and began to curse and accuse each other. Listening to their quarrel, Excel became more and more irritated. Finally, his forehead wrinkled with anger. And he was going to kill the one of them who remained. The Emperor rubbed his hands eagerly, ready to get down to business. In a panic, the two gatekeepers completely forgot about their quarrel and hugged each other. Shouting, they ran to the palace to report to the king. It seems they ran for help. Stop them, Ingus asked. But the Emperor told them to leave and asked them to tell him where the rest were. However, before he could answer, the girls approached and Ellen was already running to meet him. With apologies, she began to justify herself by saying that they were late because of the slowness of the Holy Virgin. Liena approached and tried to stop the knight from revealing the secret. Elam covered her mouth and was frightened. Well, I just let it slip that you are a sacred maiden. But Liena meant the title of Emperor. This surprised the girl. She wondered what was wrong with His Majesty. An angry Excel kicked the girl and said, "Do you really want to tell everyone around that the ruler of the Rune Empire has appeared here?" Rubbing her burning bottom from the kick, Elam apologized and admitted that she had forgotten about it. The Emperor ordered her to simply stand silently nearby and wait, and the girl obeyed. Liena immediately worried about her injury, but Elam was fine. Seeing her pale face, the Holy Emperor thought that something was wrong with her. Wiping away the sweat, the girl reassured him. "Nothing special. I just felt dizzy on the road." When he asked her not to strain herself, Liena thought with irritation that she had already strained herself because she hadn't rested at all after the dungeon. Finally, Excel met with all the knights accompanying him. Chief among them was Hevigo, who stepped forward with a bow. "It seems that the order is short of knights. What happened?" the Emperor asked. And Hevigo reported on other areas where he left a minimal number of people and mobilized the Knights of the White Dragon. There was nothing they could do. They had to defend the Wailing Wall and the northern lands. Next, Excel asked where Blumhart was. Renart replied, "He took command of the Wailing Wall instead of Hevigo," and the knight added that the rest of the warriors were holding back the orcs. Then they talked about the Wailing Wall and whether there were any problems there. Hevigo said that everything was fine before he arrived, and the Emperor began to explain his plan. "This time we will split into two detachments. One will stall for time, and the other will go to the palace." The knight listened to Excel's order with joy. Now Hevigo really believed the rumors that the Emperor had become a completely different person. Now he gave orders with confidence and everyone obeyed him. "You must destroy all who block your path. It doesn't matter whether it's a knight, a warrior, or an aristocrat. Those who resist must be killed, and those who surrender must be disarmed," said the Emperor. He ordered Liena to help the knights from behind, and Elam to guard her. Hevigo remembered the former Emperor with nostalgia, and I waited impatiently to see what would happen to the Rune Empire, but in the meantime the war was beginning. Meanwhile, the guards had already run into the palace, interrupting the general with his shouts, who was drawing something on the floor. He said, "The king had business and went to the queen's chambers. What happened?" And the knights admitted that the ruler of Rune had appeared before the royal palace. This information shocked Barza and he asked again, but they only confirmed everything. The general shouted that this was nonsense. The emperor had only just reached the border. The journey to the palace would take at least 2 days. However, the guards themselves did not understand anything, but they definitely saw a knight in the armor of the Order of the White Dragon. A mug of ink standing on the edge of the carpet fell over. Horror washed over the barge. Was the Order of the White Dragon really here? Because he didn't feel any other energy except the emperor. As the ink spread across the carpet, the general wondered if they were deliberately hiding the power of their blood. Everything was happening faster than he had expected. Suddenly, he thought that they might have used the teleportation gate. And if they secretly connected the gates with the palace chambers, although nothing suspicious was noticed on the border, Barza recalled in panic. The gatekeepers did not understand what to do now, and the general asked, "Do you know how many people he brought with him?" After they said that there were 10 people in the emperor's retinue, Barge was delighted. It was the same number that was noticed at the border. But the knights added, "They say that they were all wearing armor with the pattern of the Order of the White Dragon. We ourselves saw one of them." The general could not believe it, because there were not even 20 people in the order, and several of them were commanders and could not leave the order empty. However, the guard insisted that it was true, and the commander-in-chief must give the order for the enemy to attack. Suddenly, the door to the chambers began to shake. Screams were heard, and the guards suffered losses. Barge only smiled maliciously at this. He was angered that the emperor wanted to push through even though it would start a war. The general laughed and exclaimed, "Just 10 people are trying to start a war in the kingdom." On one side, they were attacked by Excel and his knights. Meanwhile, others, under the command of Heavigo, distracted attention. Barge had no intention of retreating. He was accepting the challenge of the Mad Emperor. Saphagold's army prepared to detain the knights of the Rune Empire. The commander gave orders that enemies had entered through the teleporter and that it was necessary to protect the king. The sound of soldiers' feet ready for battle could be heard in the chambers. The guards, realizing that knights were stationed in all the alleys, were going to take the king to a safe place. But the general became angry at such a willful division of the knights and ordered that they all be placed in front of the entrance to the palace, and also send a letter to send reinforcements, and the guards of course obeyed. However, they noticed a strange boy nearby near the barrel and began to ask who he was. Holding their noses, they complained that he emitted a strange smell like rotten blood. The angry Barge did not answer and shouted at them to carry out the order. The stunned gatekeepers looked at each other and left. When they finally emerged, Barge turned to face the boy. With a grin, he admitted, "They can also control blood. It seems they sensed your magic." The child who turned around was even surprised by this. It was Carl's, and after turning around, an amulet in the form of a red eye appeared on his neck. It delighted Barge, because it was worn by all of the blood race, and the man saw it for the first time. This amulet had a huge power that Carl's hid, which is why it had such an effect. The general recalled how he had once received part of an amulet from a representative of the blood race, but it had taken him a long time to restore his strength. Looking at the large one standing against the wall, the boy asked, "What is inside?" In response, Barge revealed that he had hidden Princess Scripps there, sealing her powers with a magical chain and amulet so that she would not escape. Wanting to say something, Carls looked at the man. However, he completely lost his temper, intending to take revenge with the help of the princess for all the insults. Such madness surprised the boy, but Barge continued to repeat how he had been living in the body of this little man for 40 years. Carl's attempts to tell the general something completely failed, and the man sent him to rest. And he himself took out a bottle filled with a strange liquid and said that this would be quite enough. In the blink of an eye, he started drinking the liquid. The boy tried to stop him, but Barza quickly finished the liquid, which even ran down his face. Carls just sighed. It was dangerous to drink. Having finished drinking, the man began to calm him down with a smile, getting ready to greet the guests alone. Throwing away the flask, Barge said, "Neither the Emperor nor the Order can cope with the demonic race," and a powerful magic ball shone in his hand. The pentagram that the general had been so painstakingly drawing lit up with overwhelming power. He added that he would not need Carl's help, and the boy simply remained silent in response. Looking at all this, he felt a gloomy mood, and the magic became stronger and stronger, enveloping the entire room. And Barge smiled, feeling as if he had already won. Meanwhile, screams were heard outside. The battle continued, as if explosions had scattered people to the sides. It was impossible to see anything in the dust. In fact, it was Elam, waving a huge shield with Liena running after her, screaming to be taken with them. Nearby, 3 knights were also fighting hard. One of the girls was worried about Renard, for whom this was her first battle after joining the Order. But Renard was confident in herself. Things weren't going so well for the enemies. They were wounded and could barely stand on their feet. The Emperor and Commander-in-Chief Hevigo were indeed strong. There was no hint in their eyes that they could lose. One of the commanders stepped forward, trying to protect the soldiers. In a panic, he realized that they couldn't even touch the Order of the White Dragon, and there were many more knights than in the report. Trying to pull himself together, the captain tried to figure out where their weak spot was, and then he saw his target. These were 2 wounded knights. It was definitely possible to break through them. The man commanded to attack them immediately, but the Order of the White Dragon had already come to the rescue. They could not be underestimated. Looking at the wounded, Rubens realized that he could not advance further with them. He ordered Rugster, who had come with him, to go to the front to the Emperor, but the knight asked what to do with the victims. Raising his huge spear, Rubens was ready to take care of them himself and asked them to trust him. Rugster obeyed him and was about to leave. He was already running quickly to the front line, but the warriors were ordered not to follow him, but to concentrate on those who remained. And immediately they went on the attack. Rubens's eyes shone with magic. With ease, he swung the weapon, which sparkled like lightning, directing all force into enemy soldiers. The attack flew further, straight at the captain. However, he managed to dodge and the blow hit the wall, exploding it. Looking back, the man thought that they were hunting for him. Rubens did not have a single wound. He stood confidently on his feet. The captain cried out in horror. "Stop them!" Smoke poured out of the chimney, surrounding the palace. Reinforcements were already rushing towards the enemy. 3 knights fought in the very center. The warriors were going to block their passage. Among them were Rinart and Scripps, who were breathing heavily and trying to hold on a little longer. Another knight was also already tired, and the number of enemies was growing. The local defense corps was armed with maces, and the knights could not get close to them. The huge mace was covered with many thorns, and they would die immediately from one blow. But then Elam broke through the line, waving her shield. The enemies scattered in different directions, and the knight even felt a little sorry for them. On the other hand, things were not so good. The maces were still attacking the knights. Renard tried to dodge, but weapons came from different directions. It was difficult to block him, and even shooting him down wasn't always possible. The sharp thorns surrounding the girl scratched her face. She realized that she would not last any longer. After all, it was too early for her to join the Order of the White Dragon. But suddenly, a magical light appeared from somewhere and gently healed her wound. It was Liena who was casting intense spells to encourage the warriors not to give up. The saint enveloped the girl in divine magic, and she looked at it with delight. With renewed strength, Renard went on the attack. Thanking Liena, the girl's shield now emitted magic. He grew to enormous proportions, pushing away everyone in his path. The blow caused the soldier's helmet to crack and blood to flow from his mouth. The enemies retreated, and the saint joyfully praised Renard, who replied that it was all thanks to Liena. "But why don't you help Elam?" the girl asked in surprise. And Liena explained that she herself was doing just fine, controlling her shield. One of the military leaders, clad in armor from head to toe, looked at the battlefield with horror. There, the Knights of the Order of the White Dragon were dealing with the soldiers in full force, and the man realized that the rumors about the Order were true. He gritted his teeth and wondered how hard it would be to break them. And yet he rushed forward, intending to kill at least one. Swinging 2 hammers, the man aimed at the weakest knight. With a cry of "Die!" he brought the hammers down on his head. The soldier, who had not expected this, raised his head in panic. He closed his eyes and waited for the blow. However, a brightly shining spear blocked the way, protecting him. And with force, the knight pushed the enemy away. The warrior in armor didn't even understand where he came from. The commander stood up, and Rubens advised him to abandon this idea. Pointing his spear, he said, "As long as I'm here, you won't be able to touch them." The soldier called to him, and the knight turned around, telling him not to yawn during the battle, not to give up, and not to make him regret his salvation. The warrior regretted that he had become an extra burden. But Rubens never considered him as such. He was a worthy comrade of the Rune Empire. Tears flowed from the soldier's eyes, and he thanked the knight. Now he was ready to help Rubens until the end of his days, and the knight believed him. Another soldier helped the wounded man up, and then their enemy made himself known. He was dragging 2 huge hammers along the ground and saying, "Are you having fun? Do you think that in war the life of a comrade is the most important thing? You are wrong. There is nothing more important than victory," he exclaimed. Pointing to the knight, the man added that if he, with his outstanding abilities, were to die, it would be out of compassion. In response, Rubens just looked at him calmly. The commander felt sorry to kill him alone, but he went on the attack, shouting that it was for the sake of victory. The knight, expecting this, blocked the hammer, and he struck back but also failed to inflict wounds. They continued to exchange blows, but the knight did not miss a single one, although it was difficult. The warlord laughed. Rubens was moving too slowly for him. After all, he improved his heavy weapons with the help of blood energy. This increased the speed of his actions and compensated for his shortcomings. With a smile, the hammerman said that he knew the knight's weak spot. Hearing this, Rubens looked at him in surprise. Seeing no point in fighting, the man looked at the 2 wounded soldiers standing nearby, and the next moment he disappeared in a blue flash. Looking around, the warriors could not understand where the enemy had gone. A blue fire flared behind them. The commander swung his sword, intending to hit the soldiers. The blow hit the target precisely, and there was a cracking sound and groans. The man called them idiots with a smile, but the warriors were alive. Rubens managed to close them and received a blow himself. Thanks to the armor, he managed to squeeze out, but was seriously wounded. His body shook with tremors. The hammerman was sure that the knight would not be able to move. "It may not have been long, but it was fun," he said again, filling his weapon with power and preparing to attack. "Farewell!" cried the commander, and the mad blow seemed to shake the earth. However, Rubens still stood on his feet, and golden magic enveloped his body. The man with the hammer's hands began to shake. He was shocked by this enormous power. The air around the knight sparkled and shimmered. The emperor, who was very close, felt his magic and turned around. At last he had shown his strength, he thought. Back in the Rune Empire, Rubens was reluctant to use the power of blood in this battle. Of course, Excel could not agree with this and ordered to fight with all his might. Then the knight explained that there would be ordinary people there, albeit from another kingdom. He left the Red Dragon Palace and followed the emperor to stop the demons from killing everyone. Rubens had no intention of using the power of blood in this war, but even without it, he could suppress the enemy. Without arguing with him, Excel allowed him to act as he wanted. But he reminded that such an action could lead to losses. Now Rubens remembered these words and realized that because of his carelessness, his comrades almost died. He no longer hesitated and released all his power. The frightened enemy was sure that the knight was just lucky. He angrily threatened Rubens, intending to smash his face. And so they went on the attack at the same time. Their magic sparkled, pushing the enemies forward. The hammer and spear met in the air. The soldiers on the ground watched in shock as the two men collided in a flurry of magic. Renard couldn't even keep track of how fast they were moving. It was clear that the one who fought Rubens also possessed extraordinary skills. Watching this battle, she hoped for the knight's victory. Another ringing sound of weapons clashing was heard. The commander felt that he was inferior in strength to the knight. He was going to increase his speed and wait for a convenient moment. On the ground, he saw those two wounded knights and wanted to use them as a distraction. By increasing his speed, the knight turned into a blue flash, so he could definitely deal with these guards. Rubens's gaze immediately spotted his target, and he too rushed forward, leaving a trail of his magic. The knight was prepared and did not fall for the same trick. Standing in front of the guards, he protected them. The commander, who had not expected this, froze because Rubens had just given in. How had he managed to get ahead? Gripping his sword more tightly, he thought that there must be some kind of mistake here. And I decided to try to use maximum force again. The two clashed again using all their magic. Bright flashes of magic filled the entire sky, and the guards could only watch. Meanwhile, the knight felt that he could not win. He had difficulty defending himself from the knight's spear. The hammerman rolled back from the blow, shouting, "Why can't I throw him back when I'm faster thanks to the power of my blood?" Rubens was even surprised that he considered his blood power to be stronger. He admitted that he had never used the power of the golden blood before. These words shocked the military leader beyond measure. He remembered with horror how he had fought off his blows without using the power of blood. The knight, gritting his teeth, could not believe it. After all, he knew that all the owners of the power of golden blood died in the war with the dragon. There was to be no one left on the mainland with golden blood. Then the knight said, "I am the last descendant to possess this power." He remembered how Sir Blumhart had helped him survive, carrying him out of a fire as a child. Power enveloped Rubens, and he said, "You tried to kill my comrades who could no longer fight." Raising his spear, he attacked, shouting that he would lose this battle because of his cavity. The angry captain tried to prove that in battle there is nothing more important than victory. By unleashing all his power, he could not lose to someone who did not take war seriously. Releasing all their strength, they went on the attack. And then a scream was heard. Hammers and blood flashed in the air. The soldier remained standing, but he no longer had a weapon or one arm. The soldiers looked at the fallen deputy commander in panic. Realizing that he could no longer defend himself, they rushed to help. One of the soldiers ordered to cover him and broke through the enemy formation. Rubens was already ready to kill the deputy, who was shaking in fear on the ground. Closing his eyes, the knight was ready to face death. But then there was a clang. The surviving deputy captain watched in shock as the soldier blocked the spear and said, "Run from here. I will hold him off." The unexpected defender stunned him, and he wanted to ask something. However, he said that they would not survive without him and ordered them to flee. The pike clanged and rose, not continuing the attack. This sacrificial act of the subordinate aroused Rubens' admiration. To the surprise of the soldiers, he decided to leave them alive if they would no longer interfere in the war. Turning around, the knight advised them to leave here. As he left, he didn't even look back at his enemies. Finally, the warriors and the wounded commander came to the camp of their troops. Feeling incredible pain in his severed hand, he understood how the course of the war would change because of him. The commander bit his lip, filled with pity. Meanwhile, Renard was already running towards Sir Rubens, admiring his abilities. She seemed to be glowing with the honor of seeing that very golden blood that she had heard so much about. Closing his eyes, the knight calmed his magic. He didn't see anything special in what had happened, because something else was more important now. Indeed, the two knights fought off the enemy attack. The girl knight shouted, "Renarda, what are you standing there for? Are you planning on being distracted by the war?" Having apologized, the girl immediately ran to help. And so Saphigold's soldiers began to retreat. The Emperor and Hevigo, skillfully wielding their blades, quickly advanced forward. Looking back, Excel ordered that the path to the royal palace be cleared. There was only a short distance left to the coveted entrance, but the entire road was filled with enemies. He only had to get there and he would see Magus and the princess, the Emperor thought. Right next to him, Rubens was smashing enemies, and Excel realized that this was his chance while everyone was busy with the knight. He easily pushed off the helmet of the nearest enemy, and so he moved on, advancing on the soldiers who did not understand anything. He quickly bypassed all the enemies and almost reached the door. One of the commanders shouted out an order to stop the Emperor, fearing that he would reach the royal palace. But Excel still hurried forward, stepping on the head of another warrior. However, he was strange with crazy scarlet eyes. When the Emperor had already jumped up, he managed to swing his sword, and he was able to cut the Emperor's shin until it bled, even through his boot. The man landed on the stairs with a groan. Anger overwhelmed Excel. How could he suffer from some warrior? Ban also couldn't understand what happened. It was a small fish. However, he suddenly felt something behind his back. It was a huge, incomprehensible force. At first, the Emperor thought that these were demons, but he realized that the sensations were a little different. At this point, the gates to the royal palace suddenly swung open. From there came out a whole army of golems overflowing with power. Behind them stood an old man with a beard who gave commands. Attack! Defend the royal palace at all costs. Using the scanning skill on him, Excel found out that his name was Ruth Island, a person with strong dragon blood energy. With the order to crush the Emperor, one of the robots rushed towards him, intending to kill him. But then someone repeated Excel's path, jumping over the heads of the soldiers. "How dare you raise your hand against the Emperor?" Hevigo exclaimed, blocking the golem's hands with his blade. But he clasped his fingers and pressed harder on the sword, causing sparks to fly. With some effort, the robot pushed the knight away. But even after this, Hevigo managed to stay on his feet. The magician solemnly introduced, "Look, these are the knights of the royal palace of Saphigold, armed golems." Suddenly there was a cracking sound, and the golem's seemingly strong armor was covered in cracks. Iceland looked at this in horror and could not believe it. The golem quickly fell apart, the arms falling off first. The shocked mage didn't understand how this could happen, because the king said that the robot's abilities could be compared to an S-rank knight. There was laughter. Such stupidity made the Emperor laugh a lot. He understood that even the strongest warriors need training. This attitude made Island incredibly angry. He even blushed from embarrassment and indignation. Excel continued to speak. He called King Saphigold and his subjects completely stupid, and this infuriated the magician. He immediately ordered the knights to be seized. Standing back to back, the Emperor and Hevigo were ready to fight. Excel began to fill the blade with his magic. Red flashes of power also sparkled around the knight. Even surrounded by enemies, they had no intention of losing. With incredible speed, the Emperor and his knight rushed forward. Beautiful golden sparks glittered on Excel's sword, and Hevigo's power burned with a bloody red fire. By joining together, they removed all obstacles around them. The frightened magician trembled with horror. And then he decided to use magic. Putting his hands on the ground, the man attacked the enemies. At this time, the Emperor gave the knight instructions. "Our goal is the King of Saphigold. If you find him, do not kill him." Here, huge boulders fell from above, preventing them from going any further. More and more stones fell along the path. They split, sending clouds of dust into the air. Iceland was breathing heavily from using such magic. Everything around was covered in dust, preventing him from seeing what had happened to the enemies, because after that they could not have remained whole. When the fog cleared a little, the magician saw the Emperor shaking his hair and asking, "Is that all?" Pointing a shaking finger at the man, Island couldn't believe how he remained unharmed after being attacked with blood energy. Maybe the other one sacrificed himself, he thought. But Excel only chuckled at this suggestion, and raising his hand, he silently pointed his finger upward. Looking at this, the magician could not understand anything. However, after thinking about it, he decided that the Emperor was pointing at something from above, and he looked up. In the sky, blocking the sun, there was a knight about to attack. Not having time to dodge, Island froze in panic, and gritting his teeth, he activated his magic. Enormous stone pillars shot up into the sky, blocking the magician's view. An incredible force emanated from Island's hand, which was pressed to the ground. Obeying him, the stones grew and connected with each other, and so they closed over the magician's head, forming a dome. Hevigo's blow landed right on him, but he couldn't break through. Only a few stones bounced off. Using all his strength, the knight tried to destroy the dome. But Island couldn't allow him to do this using his blood power. It was perfect for defense. He thought the knight would never be able to penetrate it. But the Emperor, standing nearby, believed that he was very much mistaken. Smiling, he thought about the blood of a mage that could not protect him from everything. After all, the energy of blood also varies, both in color and in strength. With his golden energy, there was no way he could overcome Hevigo's red energy, and indeed cracks were already appearing across the dome. After all, the knight's strength enhanced the effect of the weapon, and now it destroyed any defense. Once again, the astonished magician did not believe what had happened, but before he could even think about it, he was already pierced by a sword. Island's mouth began to bleed, and he couldn't wrap his head around what had happened. How could he lose when he had the highest level of blood energy in the kingdom? Hevigo decided to answer his question. The strength of energy can be the same. However, in all other respects I am far superior to you, he added, drawing his blade. The magician's body, losing blood, fell to the ground. Looking at it using Excel analysis, I really saw how much higher the Hevigo's characteristics were. After all, they finally found themselves at the entrance to the royal chambers, and the knight invited the Emperor to come in. He agreed, but first decided to ask Hevigo if he was injured. We are at war, after all. Such scratches are mere trifles, replied the knight. Believing him, Excel added that he felt the aura of demons here. This surprised Hevigo, and the Emperor wondered if it might be Magus. First, he ordered the door to be broken down to see what was going on there. Obeying the order, the knight swung his sword filled with the power of blood. A few red, glittering strokes flashed by. The door fell apart, and strange purple smoke billowed out from behind it. It gave off a pungent smell and the soldiers had to cover their faces. Even Ban closed his mouth in horror, unable to bear such a stench. Standing in front, Hevigo called out to his majesty, who looked forward in shock. Through the smoke, one could see huge horns. A little lower down, a mouthful of sharp teeth was visible. It was a huge monster, with glowing red eyes and hooves instead of feet. And it could say, "Finally you have decided to appear, Emperor." He was puzzled as to why it took Excel so long, and said that it turned out that the Mad Emperor and the White Dragon Order were nothing serious. The knight immediately raised his blade, ready to deal with the monster, but the Emperor ordered him to step back. Excel was surprised that he was recognized. It seemed to him as if he had already seen this creature. And the demon explained, "I am the messenger of Saphigold, whom you mercilessly killed." His name was Oscar Barge. He was the younger brother of Eric Barge. Hearing the name Ban instantly remembered what he looked like, and was surprised that Barge had a brother. According to the plot, Barge, who hated people, took into his body a part of one of the 7 dukes of the Devil's World. 40% of people died because of such contracts with demons. 50% lost their minds and turned into monsters. But Barge did not die and did not lose his mind. His strong hatred for people made him a real demon. Thus, the 5th demon Barge appeared. He was very cruel and took the lives of many people. After thinking it over, Ban came to the conclusion that it seemed like his brother had become a demon this time. In a panic, the man wondered if it was because of him that the plot of the book had changed again. With a grin, the demon said, "I didn't think you would recognize me. It seems like you were still a little tormented by your conscience for killing my brother." However, the Emperor responded by saying that he simply remembered the face of that creature that had become a demon. The enraged demon couldn't believe it, because his brother had never met demons. "It's a matter of time, he'll still switch to their side, just like you," answered Excel. Enraged by his brother's insult, the monster struck the ceiling with his paw, which instantly became covered in cracks. Pieces of the ceiling fell down, and the sky appeared from the hole, while the demon growled that he would certainly kill the Emperor. The power of analysis showed his abilities. Barge had enormous physical and magical strength, and the blood energy was also above normal. Realizing how dangerous this creature was and how different it was from the others, Hevigo stepped forward, ready to protect the Emperor. But the Emperor knew all this himself, and having drawn his sword, he was going to fight. The blade of light was enveloped in magic, reacting to the demon's power. Looking up, Excel felt something else. There was an aura of other demons there too, and the power of the demon hiding in the shadows was much greater. This made the Emperor frown in irritation. He couldn't figure out what else could be there. Barge immediately realized that the man was not looking at him, and in anger, he rushed forward, lowering his huge horns. Hevigo and Excel watched his movements in horror. The knight was ready to defend the Emperor at any cost, but he only shouted for Hevigo to take cover. Thanks to this, the knight was able to dodge the monster rushing forward, sweeping away everything in its path. The Emperor also barely managed to jump to the side. There was a loud bang as the demon punched a huge hole in the wall. Stones began to fall and the wall seemed to be swept away in an instant. Such power really scared Hevigo, because if it weren't for the Emperor, he would already be dead. Gritting his teeth, Ban understood that physical strength alone would not help him win. The monster would simply crush him. In the war between people and demons, even Kalsu was unable to defeat Barge, who had become a monster. Grabbing the wall, the grinning demon praised his running abilities. Jumping out of his hiding place, he shouted, "You won't escape this time." Excel summoned the silver energy of blood, realizing that without it, even predicting his movements would be difficult. And he was also haunted by this aura hidden in the shadows. Another blow from the monster interrupted his thoughts. After dodging, the Emperor said that he would take the demon upon himself and ordered Hevigo to find the owner of the other aura. In response, the knight tried to say something, but Barge interrupted him. He wasn't going to let him go that easily. Frightened, Hevigo raised his sword, trying to defend himself from the demon. But the Emperor did not let him take a single step, starting to talk about his brother. He also showed off too much and eventually died. "You will soon follow him," said Excel. Enraged, he turned to the Emperor, shutting him up. Shouting at him not to dare insult his brother, the monster attacked Excel. Blood splashed in all directions. The demon's horn entered deep into the Emperor's hand. Barge laughed and exclaimed, "A man is a complete non-entity in the eyes of a demon. You should be commended for being able to stop with one hand the fang that contains the power of the 7 great dukes," he added. Excel, not at all taken aback by this, just laughed. Meanwhile, the system warned that the amount of elixir had sharply decreased and the charge remained at 31%. And also the side effects of dragon blood spread throughout the entire neural network, and part of the body underwent changes. Despite the unpleasant news that his body was in danger, the Emperor laughed more and more. He had been waiting for such a bloodthirsty battle for a long time. The monster laughed in response too. He liked Excel. He had a hole in his palm, and he continued to bluff. But suddenly the demon realized that something was wrong. No matter how hard he tried, the horn wouldn't come out of his palm. Looking with crazy eyes, the Emperor said, "Where are you going? I am right here, right in front of you, and you are going to run away." Having ordered the man to shut up, he was ready to kill him anyway. And then Excel said, "Distortion," and the space around his hand seemed to ripple, including the horn. The monster screamed, and part of its head seemed to disappear along with its horn. Clutching his forehead, he groaned, "What kind of power is this? Stop it right now." And the Emperor only wondered where his laudatory power had gone. Screaming in pain, the demon asked to end this torture. Shocked, looking at what was left of his horn, he couldn't believe such power. Barge was sure that it couldn't be that he was the only one who suffered from such an attack. Excel must have suffered too. But the Emperor wasn't that stupid. And the system continued to report. The elixir charge is 10%. The barrier capacity is 5%. With their help, it is possible to restore the neural network. Do you want to continue? And Excel just nodded his head. And immediately the wound on his palm healed. "I don't rush into a fight without thinking, and I don't fall for obvious provocations like you," said the Emperor, showing his healed hand. Trembling with anger, the demon called him a bastard. Further provoking the monster, the man continued to talk about how he was going to go to his brother. In a mad rage, Barge attacked Excel. But in an instant, his horn and hand were cut off. Grabbing his throat, the demon did not understand what happened. But it was Hevigo who activated his blood energy and hit the distracted monster. Kneeling before the Emperor, he asked how his wound was, but Excel calmed him down and asked if the knight recognized what that aura was. The fallen demon was sure that this could not happen, because he had received the power of the 7 dukes. After drinking the pill, Barge gained the power to destroy the king and princess of Saphigold, as well as the Emperor of the Rune. Hearing this, Ban froze in shock. He immediately tried to find out what the monster did to the princess, and he confessed how he devoured the king and princess Saphigold. The Emperor's patience ran out and he swung his sword. Threatening, the man asked again what he had done with the princess. With a grin, the demon repeated his answer. He devoured her. She became food for him. The demon's body began to change strangely. His shoulders rose up and something moved beneath them. The next moment, the system warned, thus the darkness barrier appeared. A cloud of darkness formed around the enemy, and Excel raised his sword, preparing to strike. However, the system detected a strange reaction and the danger level increased to 50%, and the blade suddenly began to glow and vibrate, stunning the Emperor. Hevigo rushed towards him in the hope of helping somehow. But suddenly something incomprehensible happened to the monster's body. The knight and Excel looked at this in horror. Huge mouths emerged from his shoulders, in which bodies were visible. In one was King Magus, his face frozen in a terrible grimace, and in another, Princess Scripps seemed to be simply sleeping. The Emperor could not believe that the princess had been there all this time, and the pain in Ban's chest was growing. He also did not understand what was happening. One word sounded like an alarm in the man's head. Kill. Bent over in pain, he thought he was too tired today. Gradually, his consciousness faded, and he could not think clearly. And the eyes turned scarlet. This was again a side effect of the dragon's blood. Screaming, Excel fell to the ground. Hevigo just looked at him with confusion, and the demon rejoiced. Finally, you have run out of strength. It seems the rumors about your madness were true. By rushing into the attack, he intended to put an end to the Emperor's suffering. Trying to cover Excel, the knight shouted for him to move to the side. He fought off the attacks, but he couldn't predict from which side the monster would strike, and another blow missed Hevigo. His target was a weakened, defenseless Emperor. The knight screamed and tried to warn the Emperor, but the attack quickly overtook him. When the dust from the attack cleared, the system notified that the elixir was completely used up. Recharging was required. The side effects of the dragon's blood caused the body to overload, and it underwent changes. Excel's sword remained lying on the ground. He could no longer use it. The jubilant demon exclaimed, "In the end, you yourself suffered from the demonic power." "Well, I was the only one who saw this ridiculous spectacle. What a pity," he added, while Hevigo looked at the Emperor in horror. The monster felt that Excel's power still hadn't disappeared, and the knight looked at the Emperor in panic, also feeling his aura. The man's body changed. His hands and face became covered in scales, long claws grew, there were small horns on his head, and crazy eyes. A terrible bloody force enveloped the Emperor, and he bared his teeth angrily. It seemed like there was nothing human left in him. The demon was puzzled as to why the almost dead Excel had taken on such an inhuman appearance. The Emperor's aura seemed to suppress the monster. It was already seriously injured. Watching their fight, Hevigo tried to comprehend how much His Majesty had changed. He understood that these movements were not like human techniques. Once again, the defeated demon screamed. Princess Scripps and the king found themselves lying on the floor. The knight tried to wake up the princess, who seemed not to hear him. Running up to the girl, he didn't know if she was okay. Raising his head, the knight heard her breathing. Hevigo tried to bring the girl to consciousness with his shouts. And finally, the princess heard and opened her eyes. She was surprised to see a knight in front of her. Scripps jumped up and shouted about General Barge, but Hevigo calmed her down by saying that he was dead. And indeed, his body was cut in half. Now Barge looked like a human again and apologized to his brother as he died. Tears streamed down his cheeks as the man thought of him for the last time. Turning to the knight, the princess asked, "What about the Emperor?" And Hevigo said that Excel became very strange. The girl and the knight looked at the changed Emperor with horror, and Hevigo suggested, "Perhaps this is a side effect of the dragon's blood." At that moment, Scripps rushed forward despite the knight's cries. She was worried about Excel's condition and wanted to check on him. However, when he turned around, the man didn't seem to even recognize her. Hevigo warned her that it was dangerous, and the princess froze in panic. Scripps trembled and asked His Majesty to believe her and return to his previous state. But he screamed angrily and exclaimed, "Don't come near!" The cracked wall from the pressure of the magic began to crumble even more, and the knight kept shouting how dangerous it was. The beautiful blue carpet was now covered in bloodstains. From the torn demon lying nearby, however, the princess said that she was fine and tried to make the Emperor come to his senses. Holding his head, Excel tried to control his magic, and he didn't let the girl who wanted to help get close to him. Power overwhelmed him, and he seemed to glow with magic, and he shouted for Scripps not to come closer, since it was dangerous near him. The aura of blood literally turned the man into a dragon, and he growled in pain. Ban understood that he urgently needed to suppress the power of the dragon's blood. However, the system could not do anything. It only gave endless error messages. He urgently needed the power of the Sword of Light. But his body no longer obeyed, and the man mentally ordered the blade to appear quickly. It seemed as if the sword heard him. A golden light sparkled around it. The blade trembled. The blade rushed towards its owner. And so he rose into the air. The flight mode was activated. The sword flew straight into the Emperor's hands. The princess and Hevigo noticed the golden flash and did not have time to say anything. As soon as Excel grabbed the sword, the neural network began to recover to 40%, and the elixir level became abnormally high. The system asked, "Apply temporary cyber barrier protection," and the Emperor, of course, agreed. The deployment of the cyber barrier began, and a blue dome covered everything around. It was woven from thousands of tiny honeycombs, completely enclosing the man inside. His body seemed to hang in the air, covered in blue reflections. The level of the elixir gradually decreased, and Excel became human again. At first, the claws and scales disappeared, and the wings fell apart and the elixir reached 20%. And the Emperor, sitting down on the ground, reached a stable level. Slowly, he opened his eyes, coming to his senses. Excel gripped the sword tightly, knowing that he wouldn't survive without it. Hevigo and Scripps were already running to him, asking if His Majesty was safe. The princess sat down before him and began to cry, saying, "You started the war because of me." She was saddened that the Emperor had put himself in danger, but Excel extended his hands to her. Hugging the girl, he calmed her down and said that she was okay. "It's not your fault, so don't worry," the Emperor said excitedly. But Scripps was very ashamed that she was not stronger. In response, Excel assured that in the future she would definitely become stronger. Hevigo, who was standing nearby, tried not to look at their cooing, feeling embarrassed. Suddenly, footsteps were heard in the room and someone apologized. The princess and the Emperor interrupted their conversation, looking back at the newcomer. The knight was also surprised by the unexpected guest. It was a strange boy, radiating a demonic aura. Immediately, Excel grabbed the blade, thinking that he was a demon. A knight stepped forward, ready to fight the enemy himself. He remembered feeling this aura before. This child didn't look like a normal demon. The rustling of wings was heard, and the boy moved them slightly. The Emperor decided that the demon was going to attack. The monster moved very quickly around the room. In an instant, he found himself on his knees in front of Excel, begging for mercy. The frozen Emperor just looked at this in surprise. Trembling, the boy said, "I'm not a demon. I'm a human. Please don't kill me." This situation was very strange. Ban couldn't even remember if there was such a character in The Great War of Humans with Demons. Raising the blade and looking at the appearance of the frightened boy, Excel could not believe him. The child, in a panic, confessed that he had been taken away by demons and that his body had changed slightly and asked to believe him. His words made the Emperor doubt whether he really was not a demon, but the boy insisted that he was, and the man touched his wing with a blade of light burning with magic. The wing began to smoke and the child screamed, "It hurts, what are you doing?" Blowing on the injured wing, he was glad that at least it hadn't been punctured. "This burn is irrefutable proof that you are a demon," Excel said menacingly, and he added that the sword of light reacts to their skin. But the boy, no matter how strange it sounded, still insisted that he was a human being. Turning away, the Emperor put away his sword and wanted to leave, ordering the child to go away. Scripps was surprised. "Your Majesty, you will simply leave him." But the man had no time for this. First, he wanted to meet with the other members of the team, because they had spent all their strength and could not resist the demon. Despite this, the princess wanted to talk to him, although Excel told her to just leave. Sitting down in front of the child, she began to ask, how did he end up here, and what was his name? At first, such questions confused him, and he did not know how to react. But he confessed that his name was Carl's, and upon hearing this, the Emperor froze. Looking at the child, he asked again if his name was really Carl's, if he was sure. Scripps looked at the suddenly interested man in surprise when the boy jumped up, assuring her that it was so. "My name has been Carl's since birth," he answered confidently. Excel ran towards the boy as fast as he could. Grabbing him by the shoulders, the man continued to ask him, "Are you Carl's, from the mining village of Precio?" The stunned child wondered how so much was known about him. Hevigo did not like this attitude towards the Emperor of the Great Rune Empire. Understanding this, Carl's asked to loosen his grip a little. The shoulders that Excel had been squeezing until now were aching. Magic suddenly sparkled around the Emperor's hands. It was the silver energy of the blood that made itself known. When it covered the whole body, it became really hard to bear, and Ban had only just found Carl's. Then there was a loud knock. The rest of the knights from the team arrived. Elam, who was running at the end, blocked the doors with her shield. The enemies rushed inside and the girl put in a lot of effort. She could not hold out for long. Seeing the saint, Hevigo ordered her to immediately check the condition of the Emperor, with whom something was happening. The girl immediately noticed Excel, who was standing surrounded by silver light, holding his head. And then Liana activated her magic. The Emperor's eyes were already rolling back in pain and fear, but after the influence of the saint's magic, he came to his senses. The girl's light magic enveloped the man in golden reflections. Finally, Excel felt better and thanked Liana, but she only said that it was her responsibility. The knights who arrived saw Princess Scripps and were glad that the girl was okay and that they had made it in time. Holding the Emperor's arm, Sir Rubens reported, "The soldiers are still gathering in front of the palace, and at the moment it will be difficult to get through to the teleporter." Here he noticed Carl's, wondering who this child was, from whom the strong energy of the demon emanated. Excel said that the first thing to do was to take him with him to the Empire, which made the boy extremely happy. The emperor then called Carls, who immediately stood at attention, ready to serve. The man ordered that Barge's body, which was lying far away, be brought. The boy grabbed the body with difficulty, trying to lift it. With the help of his wings, he managed to cope with the barge. "Your Majesty, should I fight with you too?" asked Carls. To this, Excel demanded that he fold his wings and simply follow him, giving him the corpse. And so the general's body was handed over to the emperor, and Saphagold's troops were still pounding on the door. The knights and Elam could no longer hold them back. The soldiers knocked on the doors so hard that stones fell from the ceiling. To break through, they used a huge battering ram. The chief excitedly gave the command to break down the door faster. Barely able to hold such a colossus, the warriors swung, and the wooden battering ram crashed into the door with force, breaking through it. Soldiers immediately ran into the palace. However, the captain's order to stop made them freeze. Someone was coming out from inside and they did not know what to do. A strange shadow appeared in the doorway. The warriors could not understand who it was. The man said, "You don't need to know this, just accept it," and raised something into the air. When the object hit the ground, the soldiers recoiled in horror, but Excel ordered to take a look. It was the dead body of Barge, and the emperor said that he met such an end because he deceived the king. The soldiers did not believe that General Barza was dead, and the captain felt a demonic aura emanating from him. Threatening with his sword, he shouted, "What have you done to him?" Completely calm, Excel didn't answer, he just looked at him. Suddenly, the king came out of the room with the support of his daughter, and the warriors immediately tried to find out what was going on. Magus replied, "Barge betrayed us by conspiring with the demons." And he told how the general tried to make the kingdom of Sapphire Gold a base for the demon army, and also to get rid of him and the princess. And at the end, the king added that all this was prevented by the emperor of the Great Rune Empire. The shocked soldiers froze, not understanding what to do next. Then Excel gave them two roads. Drawing his sword, he said, "First, you and your king are completely subordinate to me. The second is to die immediately by my hand," the emperor finished, waving his blade. Of course, the warriors were surprised to instantly recognize the Sword of Light, and remembered the rumors that had been circulating lately. The king was also shocked by these words. Should he really submit to the Rune Empire? The emperor did not back down from his words. Exactly, the kingdom of Saphagold will become part of the empire. Of course he was going to grant autonomy. However, standing before Magus, Excel said that in the face of the war with the demons, all nations must unite. The frightened king listened to him in panic, and the emperor gave a choice whether everyone would survive, or they will die, he declared, scaring Magus to the point of trembling. He could barely utter a word after repeating after Excel. But bowing his head, the king decided that people's lives were more important. The emperor praised him for his wise choice and remembered that they had been in Saphagold for a long time, and that if communication was not established, the Rune troops could attack. Pushing away his hand that was lying on his back, Magus understood everything. He immediately ordered an immediate end to all battles with the Rune Empire. The captain hastened to report to the others and arrest everyone connected with the barge. The Rune Knights could finally relax. Renart was worried about Rubens's injury, but he replied that it was nothing serious. Elam complained of pain all over her body, and Carls, who was walking next to her, suggested that she stretch. It was all over, and they were about to go home. Looking at this, Excel noted their good work with a smile, and, on his orders, they were ready to return to the Empire. The two knights walked arm in arm, supporting each other. Lena sighed happily. Elam laughed, and Renart smiled and put her sword back in its sheath. All wounded, they were happy that the war was over. Even the most steadfast of them allowed themselves slight smiles, and Carls was infinitely pleased that he had finally gotten out of the demonic world. The lights were bright in the imperial dining room. At the head of the table sat Excel enjoying his food, and next to him stood a joyful Carl. Duran, who had taken up a position nearby, was a little upset because he had already prepared several backup plans for this war, but it seemed that it was all in vain. The emperor was stuffing his mouth full but still listened to his minister. The atmosphere at the table was strange. When two people were happy and eating, and one person sat irritably and could not swallow a bite. "And you look like Carl," he said to the boy. Excel confirmed that he was a human vampire, and upon hearing this, Carls even choked, trying to deny it. He shouted, "I'm just a man, I'm not a demon." The scream was so loud that Duran covered his ears. The emperor said with irritation, "Get up and spread your wings, then let's see if there is anyone who will believe you." Carl could only remain silent to this. The man also ordered not to raise his voice, and the upset boy obediently agreed. He established such a ban because vampires can kill people simply by raising their voices, Duran was surprised and immediately understood why his head hurt. "Nothing happened while we were gone," asked Excel, and the minister replied that the movement of the demon commander Diklu was extremely unusual. Having heard about Dikla, Carls told how it was because of him that he was unable to escape. Intrigued, Duran asked if the boy knew any information about him, but Carls didn't know anything important. However, for the minister, any information was of great value, and the boy told everything he knew. Diklu is a vampire. He is the most powerful of all the blood relatives of vampires. And he also converted him? It all started in Rayanum, the autonomous city of the Temple of Light. There he was captured by a man who was a werewolf monster. Somehow, Carls was able to absorb it. He fought on his own and was able to endure. Excel was amazed how, having become a werewolf, the boy turned back into a vampire. Thinking about it, Carl decided that although it seemed impossible, a miracle had probably happened to him. For Ban, this was not just a miracle, he knew how pure the boy's soul was, not containing dragon blood. Thanks to this, using the Sword of Light, he played an important role in the war between demons and humans. The man understood that no matter how much he was consumed, his soul was pure and in complete control of his body. Having thought it over, he was glad that he had ended up in the Emperor's body. Otherwise, Carls would not have allowed him to stay in his body and would have quickly gotten rid of him. Imagining such an outcome, the Emperor was truly frightened. Duran even asked if everything was okay, but the man reassured him. "Carls, you asked me to protect you from Diklu. Why couldn't you escape?" Axel asked. And the boy explained that related vampires sense each other's location. Touching the pendant, he continued to talk about how he needed help to escape because he could not win on his own. Now the Emperor knew that Carls could sense where the vampire was, and Duran was pleased with such useful information, with which one could predict the movement of demons. However, there was a risk of their plans being exposed. Excel compared his strength to Barge becoming a demon, and the boy beamed, thinking it was a compliment. But the Emperor immediately corrected him. "That's not a compliment," which upset Carls, and he apologized. "In any case, you mean to say that Diklu is not your enemy," the man clarified. To which the boy admitted that he was 5 times more powerful than him. This really stunned Excel, but Carls was not upset at all, he was sure. The Emperor was definitely stronger than him, because he so easily defeated Barge, although he was very strong. Excel wasn't so confident in himself. He didn't think he could defeat Dikla. The boy was incredibly surprised by this. He didn't expect this at all. Duran was also amazed by the Emperor's confidence, even though he had received the best fencing lessons in the Empire. However, Excel knew that Carls would also have to fight, because by finding the boy, Diklu would find him too. Meanwhile, screams were heard in the demon palace. The vampire could not believe what had happened. The subject tried to calm him down, but the commander, knocking down the torch in a fit of emotion, sat down next to him. The boy was related to him by blood and could not escape. The fire from the torch grew stronger as the Emperor grew angry at such betrayal. Feeling an insane rage, the vampire threw the remains of the torch at the wall. The demon next to him spoke worriedly. "We haven't figured anything out yet. Maybe there was some confusion." But the angry Diklu immediately shut him up. He felt Carls in the Rune Empire. What other explanation could there be? Blood vampires had no right to disobey him, and such behavior caused the general's insane anger. But then a voice rang out across the room. "You are trying to justify your failure, Diklu. The ruler of the world will simply turn a blind eye to betrayal." This was said by a beautiful demoness with red hair. She saw Dikla like this for the first time, and he even attracted her. Turning around, the vampire called her Gremory, and the subject bowed respectfully to the queen of the succubi, who was upset by such a modest meeting. The demon began to justify himself by saying that they had not been informed, but the demoness pointed her finger at his lips, and he immediately fell silent. She didn't want to listen to his pathetic excuses, but Diklu asked her not to waste her energy and asked, "Nobody warned us. For what purpose did you come?" After letting the servant go, Gremory admitted that she simply decided to get some fresh air. But the vampire didn't believe her, and the queen said, "In the demon kingdom, strength comes first, but results decide everything." But Diklu didn't understand what she meant, and the demoness explained to the frightened Diklu, "A lord who fails is not trustworthy. The hierarchy of demons has long since failed. The coward hid in the temple to recreate the broken core." A dark fire lit up Gremory's palm, and he said that Diklu was no longer relevant. She still accepted him as the head, but from now on the forces of absorption are subordinate to the queen. The vampire had nothing to answer to this. "You won't succeed anyway. You're too narrow-minded. You shouldn't kill the strongest enemy, but immediately destroy humanity," the demoness said, approaching him. Diklu argued that the Rune Empire couldn't be ignored and would have to be fought anyway, but Gremory was going to put that off until later. And to the demon's attempts to prove the importance of victory over the Empire, she only replied that the most important thing is victory. But now Diklu is suffering defeat, and he will have to obey her. The vampire had no choice and did not argue, and he only agreed, which made the queen happy. Meanwhile, in the Rune Empire, several people gathered on the training field. It was the Emperor, Sir Duran and Prince Saphigold Volter. They came to practice magic, and the young man wondered how such a place was built in the palace. Excel, who was also practicing here, asked the prince to show his magical power. A very nervous Volter was afraid of being disgraced in front of the greatest magician Duran. However, he only laughed and said not to worry about such things. The prince decided to start with 2 basic forms of fire magic. The first one was a fireball that appeared in his hand. He flew forward in search of his target, and then Volter cried out, "Flame!" The fireball immediately attacked the target. Duran immediately clapped his hands praising the prince's wonderful trick and skills. Even the emperor admitted that he was quite capable, and Portro thanked them. But he admitted, "Because of hemolysis, I'm only capable of this." Excel encouraged him. "This problem can be solved with the help of the elves. Scripps is almost back to normal and you will succeed." And he added that it was more important to learn how to combine magical elements. To begin with, Duran was going to demonstrate a brief instruction. Putting his hand on the emperor's chest, the magician decided to take advantage of his body. Duran closed his eyes and a magical seal flashed on his hand. After that, he looked at Excel. "Now you can observe the elements of the emperor." Around him were various shades of brown and orange, and Duran explained that His Majesty had 70% earth affinity and 30% fire affinity. Ban remembered that there were only 4 elements that the mages of the continent of Iroth deal with: fire, ice, wind, earth. The Emperor's ratio was not the best, he asked. "Isn't earth magic the weakest?" Duran replied that it all depended on the skills of use. The earth element was very difficult to control. Using magic, the minister placed his hand on the ground, and a crack spread across the entire area. Everything around shook. Stones fell. Objects fell out of their places. "It was an earthquake spell," Duran said. And when he saw it, the prince opened his mouth in surprise. Then he connected 2 verses, control of stones, and, obeying the will of the magician, huge boulders flew into the air. The minister admitted, "If the prince and His Majesty can combine their skills, they will generate even greater power." And Excel, taking the talisman in his hands, will feel an increase in magical power and blood. It was unusual for Voltra that magic and blood could fight at the same time, but that was exactly the effect of the talisman. The Emperor even wanted to give him the talisman, if he knew that it would be so, because he rarely uses magic in battle. "Anyway, Volter, after Duran's training, you'll be able to use more mana than you can now. Train properly," Excel said. With a bow, the young man thanked His Majesty with all his heart. He couldn't even believe in such concern, considering what had happened to Saphigold. However, the Emperor reassured him he was going to take the prince with him to the ruins of Rud. His powers will definitely play into Excel's hands. At the time when the Rune Empire and Saphigold ended the war and formed an alliance, it became more difficult for demons to invade the lands of the Empire, because they had to go around the Wailing Wall. So they tried to invade the West. After all, it would be easier for them to capture people than to break into the Empire. But next to Jeskara, there was the island of Lauren, where the demons' enemies, the monsters, lived. The name of those monsters is wyverns. Their speed gives them incredible power. And when entering into battle, they attack as a whole pack. Even demons have a hard time surviving a fight with wyverns. Of course, the people living in Jaskar were also in danger. They fled, but they had hope, because in those lands lived a knight of the White Dragon of the Rune Empire, the owner of the ability of green blood. He acted as a protector for Jeskara. He has the ability to resist both demons and wyverns. It was thanks to her that the situation stabilized and the monsters could be driven away. He became an indispensable inhabitant for the villagers. The sun shone from a shining sky, reflecting on the ocean waves that washed the beach. From somewhere in the cave, Excel's voice was heard. "From now on, everyone behave quietly. Especially to you, Carls," he added. And the boy covered his mouth with his hands. Scripps and Volter, who were walking next to him, only looked at him in surprise. He whispered to the princess why His Majesty was so cruel to him, to which she advised him to understand him, because in this place there lived many wyverns with a keen sense of smell. At this time, the emperor was looking closely at the sky, and he ordered that he be immediately informed when a wyvern was discovered. The princess and the prince immediately agreed. Not hearing any confirmation from Carls, Excel turned around, asking for his answer. However, he was no longer nearby, although he had just been standing there. A boy's voice came from above. "Your Majesty, there is a wyvern here," he shouted, hanging from the ceiling of the cave. Carls pointed his finger at a monster with huge wings flying nearby, carrying the body of a demon in its paws. The Emperor immediately exclaimed, "Carls, come down, right now!" But the boy was too far away to hear him. The wyvern immediately spotted the strangers with its keen eye. Throwing the demon aside, she flapped her wings and flew after her prey. There was an angry roar, and the wyvern bared its huge fangs. Excel ordered the boy to fly down quickly, but he did not obey, because there was only one monster and he could deal with it. Carls hit the wyvern hard in the face. Oda flew back in shock and opened her mouth wide. A piercing scream was heard all along the coast. The confident boy said that he would take care of her and come down immediately. The Emperor was angry and exclaimed, "Stop all action!" Many shadows with wings appeared on the horizon. Carl froze in shock. Apparently the wyvern was with friends. The terrible open mouth rushed after its target. The travelers fled, and irritated Excel scolded the boy. "I told you to be quiet." And he closed his eyes and apologized endlessly. Scripps and Volter used magic in an attempt to hold off the monsters. However, they covered themselves with their wings, creating an invisible shield. The wyvern's eyes glowed maliciously, and she didn't let anyone near her. The Emperor knew that such attacks would not defeat them. To begin with, they were going to hide in the forest. A cave was visible in the thicket, where the fugitives headed. Excel entered first, followed by the prince and princess. Having caught his breath, the man looked to see if everyone had arrived. And then he realized that someone was missing. "Carls, where the hell is he again?" the Emperor exclaimed angrily. It turns out that he was grabbed by the wing, and the boy tried to get out, assuring that it would happen soon. He pounded on the clawed paw, screaming to be let go. And when Carls was finally free, he immediately flew into the cave. But then a magical light began to emanate from the wyverns, and the boy didn't even see it. Scripps tried to warn him of the danger. However, the bright light from the throats of the monsters had already struck Carls. But something strange happened. Huge roots started crawling along the walls. The prince kept his magic ready, intending to cover them. But the Emperor stopped him. There was no need for that. A man was hiding in the shadows. The divine guardian of the forest had appeared. It seemed like the magic would hit the boy right on target. But roots and vines were already crawling around him. The blow found its target. An explosion was heard. Leaves and wood fragments flew in all directions. But Carl still remained alive and looked around the area with surprise. He didn't know what it was, but it saved him. A long-haired man standing on a tree branch shouted, "It's dangerous here. Leave quickly before the others arrive." Indeed, the wyverns outside were trying their best to get into the wooden dome. The boy waved his hands, saying, "Wait, there's still a group of people with me." The man did not expect that the child was not alone. Looking around, he noticed the Emperor, and it shocked him. How did he end up here? Excel greeted Just and said he was looking for him. "I have received no information about your arrival," the keeper said. And with the help of a scan, the Emperor saw that his indicators were all S rank and greatly exceeded the norm. The wyverns in the sky continued to attack them with magic. Now the people had protection, but the power still penetrated, forcing them to cover their eyes. Realizing that they wouldn't last long, Just called them to shelter. The travelers followed the guard deeper into the cave. There, among the greenery and mushrooms, a wooden hut was hidden and voices were heard nearby. Excel ordered them to be taken to the ruins of the stone ore. But Just was worried it was too dangerous to enter the ruins without some preparation. But the Emperor was sure. "You have excellent information about this area, and besides, talented people of the Empire have arrived with me." Just claimed, "The remains of stone ores contain a lot of light-absorbing element. It is more difficult to find there than in other runes," while Scripps was meanwhile enthusiastically examining Carl's wings. In response, Excel asked Walter to demonstrate his powers. A bright flame lit up on his hands. With its help, the Emperor was going to illuminate the ruins. The Guardian was still unsure, because maintaining magic required a lot of mana, and he would have to fight monsters in the dark. Then Excel turned to Carls and asked him to come over. As he approached, he immediately began to ask for forgiveness for his behavior. But the Emperor grabbed him by the hands and ordered him to come to Just, and the boy was angry that he was being pulled by his new clothes. Looking at the child with curiosity, the keeper asked, "Is he really a demon?" Excel clarified that he is a half-demon and can clearly distinguish things even in the dark. Laughing, Carls boasted, "I have excellent night vision." But the Emperor, holding him by the scruff of the neck, corrected him that it was not a compliment. The boy was offended, and Excel threatened to return him to Dekel. "A lot has changed in the Empire while I was away. I think your preparation is sufficient," concluded the thoughtful Just. Having released Carls, the Emperor also added that Princess Sapifigolda, Scripps, was with them. He praised her handling of dragon blood and her fighting skills, which greatly embarrassed the girl. Bowing slightly to her, the keeper said, "I have heard of Ingress, and you handled chains easily." However, the modest girl believed that she was far from the Knights of the White Dragon. Finishing the conversation, Excel ordered them to rest today, and tomorrow they would move out into the ruins. The next day, the sun was still shining and exotic plants were growing all around. The team followed Just, and they still had a little way to go. Seeing the princess looking around, the Emperor told her not to get carried away by the scenery, because these were the second most dangerous ruins. "Yes, Your Highness, this time I will not be a burden to you," Scripps assured. Little by little, they moved further and further into the forest. There were dangerous plants along the way, and the absent-minded Carls had to be protected. And then their guide froze. The travelers finally arrived. They stood in front of a huge tree, in the trunk of which there was an entrance, and above it hung someone's skull. Excel gave the order to enter and for everyone to be on the alert. So the team obediently entered the terrible opening following the Emperor. It was already dark at the entrance. Walter asked if he should use magic, but the Emperor told him to save mana. Shivering Carls complained of the cold, and the princess advised him to fold his wings. When the Emperor shouted at him to go on foot, he obeyed. And with surprise, I saw something strange ahead. It was a huge expanse. It seemed like a small mining village. While walking down the stairs, Scripps stumbled and Excel noticed it. He grabbed her hand and advised her to be more careful, and the princess thanked the man. Looking at their clasped hands, Carls was offended that he did not receive so much kindness from the Emperor. Just looked around in confusion, feeling something strange. When he reported this to the Emperor, he agreed with him, also feeling the aura. There were shadows in the ruins, and he remembered there were wolves at the entrance to the ruins. And indeed, they were met by a whole flock with glowing yellow eyes. There was a cry, "Volter, fire!" and the prince immediately summoned magic. The wolf was very close. It seemed like he was about to attack. The beasts growled and bared their fangs, their eyes shining brightly in the darkness. Waving his hand, Excel managed to protect Voltar. Scripps was worried about the trap, and Carls was ready to fight. The Emperor ordered, "Scripps and Carls take care of the wolves, Volter. Cover the area around the princess with fireballs." The wolves began to act, trying to attack people. However, following Excel's order, they were able to defend themselves. The princess wielded the chain perfectly, leaving the wolves no chance. The boy nearby also fought well, killing them with his bare hands. An animal was sneaking up on the girl from behind, but she was warned in time. Swinging the chain, she easily fought off the wolf and accidentally hit Carls on the head. "Sorry, are you okay? I didn't see you in the dark," Scripps admitted. But other than a little pain, the boy was fine. Volter, covering them with fire magic, warned that the beasts were attacking again. The boy and the princess set to work destroying the enemy. When everything was finished, the Emperor praised them. Having caught her breath, Scripps decided to clarify. "Your Majesty, can we leave the bodies of the wolves here?" But he did not understand what she meant. "I heard that their hearts and claws are of great value," the girl said, and Carls even thought they were tasty. But now it was not important for Excel. The first priority for them was to get inside the ruins, and he called the boy to go further. They headed deeper into the darkest cave. The deeper the team went, the darker it became. Excel decided to ask the sword if it was wise to use it, but he answered negatively since his effectiveness in the ruins was reduced by 2%, and recommended not to take out the sword since recharging was not possible. And Ban decided to use fire magic if necessary and put the Sword of Light aside for emergencies. He was worried that after the wolves, they would definitely appear. He needed to conserve his strength as much as possible. The Emperor sent Carlos ahead to guide them with his night vision, and I decided to look at his abilities, which were high, with the exception of Dragon Blood. Here the boy tensed, feeling something ahead. From the dark depths came terrible screams. On the Emperor's orders, Volter sent a fireball there. The fire hit the living creature but did not kill it. The monster, which had 3 snake heads, roared. Carls realized that the blow only made him angrier. A terrible anger shone in the monster's eyes, directed at the magician. Volter flinched, realizing that he was the target. The monster opened its mouth wide and tried to grab the prince. However, the boy stopped him by grabbing his body. The snake turned around and tried to attack the obstacle, but it failed. "Thank you, Carls. Thanks to you I survived," said Volter. And he only grinned and replied that it was nothing. 2 more heads approached the boy from behind, and the prince cried out in warning. But Carls easily dodged all the attacks, saying, "Nothing special, just some fun." And so he pressed himself against the monster's head and, looking straight into its eyes, activated hypnosis, ordering it to stand still. The huge snake immediately froze, and the boy sank to the ground. He plugged his nose, complaining about the spitting and the foul smell. The smell made Walter's head spin, and the Emperor warned, "Basilisks contain deadly poison. Hold your breath until we leave." Scripps was surprised that Carls felt nothing and was fine. But Excel said not to worry, because vampires' immunity is stronger than that of humans. Hearing this, the boy flared up, claiming that he was a man. The man didn't even pay attention to him as he passed by, ordering him to get ready, since they still had a long way to go. Flying behind him, Carl kept insisting, "But I am truly a man." The Emperor only calmly agreed with him, asking him to concentrate. Outside, by this time, evening was falling and the sun was setting. On the continent of Eros, wyverns are found not only in the northeast of Lauren Island. Some of them are also located in the southeast. In this place, wyverns freely cross seas and continents, and they call it the Black Peak Island. People live on the peninsula near it. They quietly forage for food when the wyverns fly away to the island. Looking into the distance, the fisherman noticed something strange, but his companion was sure that now was not the time for the wyverns to return. When his friend continued to insist, he looked up at the sky, and there really were strange silhouettes, completely unlike wyverns. And then someone landed on the mast and said, "My God, you're talking about us." The fisherman turned away in horror, not expecting guests. The membranous wings rustled as they straightened. There stood the succubus Queen Gremory, waving her hand at them with a smile and greeting them. The men immediately guessed that it was a demon, wondering what they wanted from them. As she descended, the demoness confessed, "We were flying past, I thought we'd take a look." She stepped onto the deck very quietly. A pleasant smell came from her, and Gremory asked, "What is on this ship, that's all? Sad." Her fabric-covered breasts immediately attracted the attention of men. The fisherman blushed, embarrassed by the fact that she was practically naked. It was the first time they had met such demons. "Handsome men, would you come closer to me? I want to whisper something to you," the queen said seductively. Then two more men appeared, looking in surprise at their bewitched colleagues. "Are you completely off your rocker? She's a demon," they tried to shout, but they didn't even pay attention. The captain stepped forward, blocking his subordinates and asking why Gremory had visited them. Realizing that he was the boss here, she turned her powers on him. Touching the man, she said, "How brave." He tried to resist, but it was all pointless. The demoness ran her hand over his burning cheek and called him cute. The captain pulled out a dagger, pushing Gremory away, but she said that she only came to have fun. When the queen touched his hand, he trembled and dropped the dagger. Hugging the man, she asked, "Is this what you really want, right?" The fishermen standing nearby envied their captain and wanted to be next. Gremory smiled because the man could not reject her. And then she kissed the embarrassed man who didn't understand anything. Some mysterious light passed from his body to the demoness. The queen flew away licking her lips, and the man was enveloped in sparkling magic. Having thanked him, she said how long it had been since she had eaten such sweets. And the captain froze, not understanding what was wrong with his body. And he fell unconscious onto the deck. And when his subordinates saw this, they immediately ran up to him. Flying in the air, the queen chuckled. "God, he fainted people, although weak, are so tasty."